All right. Hello, everybody. Happy Monday to you all. It is 05/05/2025, which I don't know, feels kind of numerically significant. Welcome to the April newsroom analysis. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me okay. I am just going to continue talking, working our way into this thing before I just start getting into the articles today. But if this is your first time here and you're wondering what this is and why we are gathered, this is a little project that I began at the beginning of the year where I sit down and look at all of the news articles from the last year, the last month, and look at the ones with implications for the research that I've been doing into human rights and into high control groups, particularly within a religious context, simply because of the fact that I was raised in a conservative Catholic family, so it's a world that I understand very, very well, at least the Catholicism side of it all. I understand it very, very well. So, yes, 555 Thunderbird, make a wish. So today I have all of the notable headlines for the last month, the month of April, out before me. I feel like there are fewer this past month than there were the month previous, but a couple of them are pretty lengthy reads, so I'm going to go ahead and get rolling here. But thank you so much for being here. If it's your first time here, please leave a thumbs up. Leave a thumbs up regardless of whether or not it's your first time here, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. But let's get into the first headline. This is from El Diario. The headline reads, "The Threads in Sight, Augustine Laje, the Cultural Battle, and the Government's Links with Opus Dei. The religious organization has an unexpected revival in the 21st century at the hands of a government that, in the absence of its own cadres, found in that structure some of the figures it needs and theoretical foundations for its actions." I feel like my microphone is like magnifying my voice in the room that I'm sitting in, which is kind of a new thing. I don't know that I've ever noticed it doing that before, but anyway, this article is really interesting. It's written by Paula Bistagnino. She's becoming a consistent feature here on this channel, which I'm very happy about. Her journalism is wonderful. She's done quite a bit of work, including having written a book now talking about Opus Dei's influence in Latin America. Before we proceed, just because I'm sure there will probably be a couple of funky things, all of these articles, a lot of them were written in other languages. I don't just pull headlines from, English speaking sources. I'm looking all around the world, out of multiple different nations. And so this was translated to English with Google Translate. And sometimes the translations can just be kind of funky for some reason. It will mess up gender and tenses and that kind of thing. So if I start to stumble and stammer a little bit as I'm going through this, please just bear with me. I'm doing my best. But getting right into this. On March 24th, the anniversary of the beginning of the last and bloodiest civic, ecclesiastical, military dictatorship in Argentina, the government published an institutional video to clarify its vision of the past, denial of the facts, and also of their meanings. And for such a task, they decided to sit in the front row a painting of the cultural battle, Augustine Laje. Several years before Javier Milei began his presidential career, a very young political leader graduated from the Catholic University of Cordoba was already adding kilometers in the race to influence the conservative, global capitalist extreme right. And before Santiago Caputo or Manuel Adorni saw them, it was Opus Dei, which takes decades for everyone in this material and cultural battle to restore a world lost to secularism and democracy. They're saying that Opus Dei is on this holy war against the rest of society. Laje was the one who made his relationship with Opus Dei official. On June 25th, 2020, he posted on his Instagram account a photo in front of a mural that reads, "University of Navarra," and announced, "Well, it is official. I am a master in philosophy." The photo is not only the classic memory of any graduate, and there it is, the photo in question, Universidad de Navarra. The University of Navarra is the academic elite of the power machinery that is Opus Dei. Far from the deceptive self-presentation that this ultra-conservative Catholic organization makes of itself when it says that it has nothing but a spiritual message, quote, the work is a great international network present in 68 countries, including all of America, for 75 years, which brings together economic and political elites and a kind of large corporation with a vocation for government. I really, really appreciate, you'll probably hear me say this again later on, but I appreciate reading about the United States and like US politics and government and that kind of thing from non-American sources. I appreciate the difference in perspective. Anyway, continuing. Navarra, the first high school house in Opus Dei, was founded in 1952 in Pamplona, the city where Escrivá de Balaguer found refuge in 1937 after his departure from Republican Madrid, the place that became the nuclear center of his work in Spain. Navarra is in the headquarters of the idea that Laje gives to the world, with an impressive penetration throughout Latin America and Spain, a power plant of thought from the extreme right that dreamed and projected the hegemony that it enjoys today because it is a power plant of thought for action, and that is where the threads are seen. Only Laje or Opus Dei can tell how this relationship began. It is said that the godfather was his mentor, Nicolas Marquez, an aspiring member of Opus Dei who did not give the profile or the average to arrive, but there are indications that it works. After the master's degree that he approved with a thesis entitled The Post-Truth, an analysis from the philosophical categories of Foucault, Laje began his doctorate under the tutoring of Montserrat Herrero, Opus Dei numerary and professor of philosophy in Navarra, with which he recorded a video on his YouTube channel. He also recommended several times the videos on Santo Tomás de Aquino from the Argentine numerary, doctor of philosophy and head of metaphysics in Navarra, Agustin Echevarria. I have my windows open, by the way, because it's a really beautiful day, so you may hear some noise, traffic, and stuff outside. Hopefully, it's temporary and not too distracting. Where does Laje's truth come from when he talks about the last military dictatorship, or when he tries to install that there is something called gender ideology, and that there is a nature to attend to in terms of identities and sexual orientation? Laje is not the same as the hordes of trolls that play terraplanissimo on social networks. Laje aims for academic rigor and plausibility in what he postulates. His work is deeper, and it is that depth in the cultural battle that the government needs and in which Opus Dei is a specialist. So this photo here is depicting Garcia Mancia, men from the Austria University, the Argentine subsidiary of Navarro, when he was sworn in as a member of the Supreme Court of Justice. Especially if it is about post-truths, half-truths, or pious falsehoods, the rules of the organization not only enable but demand that its members lie for and for the good of the work. A version of the end justifies the means, which internally is called mental restriction or lax consciousness, and which enables the hiding of information, denying historical facts, passing over laws, because Opus Dei is not a thing of men, but a thing of God. I think that is a really, really interesting, fascinating justification to use. And I mean, this is hardly the first time that an organization or group of people have used God or like a godly directive as an excuse to essentially do whatever they want. And you see that very clearly in this article and the phrasing and everything. Opus Dei is not a thing of men, but a thing of God. I mean, that's not the first time that I've heard that type of phrasing or that sentiment bandied about within the organization from, former members and people talking about things that they experienced. It's really, really interesting. And again, you can justify anything with that kind of logic. In expanding its truth, Opus Dei understands that academic training and professional prestige are necessary and burdensome. In that battle, he has landed with daughter universities of Navarra and Latin America more than in any other part of the world. The way of operating has two ways. One is to attract aligned figures and ideas and forms to the structure to be and appear, who occupy important roles and have influence. The other way is to locate pictures of its structure in key places of the power circuits and especially in the state. In Argentina, this was achieved since the 1960s with peaks in de facto and massive governments in the 1990s, especially in the judiciary. feel like it's interesting because you can kind of see similar things having played out here in the United States that mimic a lot of the stuff, things happening within the United States government, within the United States judiciary, within like the last decade, I would say. And now, Opus Dei has an unexpected revival in the 21st century by the government of Javier Milei, who, in the absence of his own cadres, found in that structure some of the figures he needs, and above all, the theoretical foundations that support your actions. This is the case of the now wobbly Supreme Court Judge Manuel Garcia Mancia, appointed by decree and in commission, and also that of the Treasury Attorney General Santiago Castro Videla, as replacement for Rodolfo Barro, confessed cooperator of Opus Dei, two men from Astral, the Argentine subsidiary of Navarra. And the work found, after several decades, a government that needs it to forge the structure that it does not have, which, once again, is kind of how, at least from my understanding, everything that I've read, in my opinion, kind of how Opus Dei has tended to function in the past. They are very, very opportunistic, very good. People involved in that organization are very good at placing themselves in opportune spots to seize and take advantage of places in government and within the rest of society, really, where they can sort of plug in and start to do what they do, which is to further the Opus Dei agenda, which is this, re-Christianization of the entire world. As far as it is possible to know, because part of the essence of Opus Dei is to hide it, neither Laje nor Garcia Mancia nor Castro Videla Pitaron in the ranks of Jose Maria Escriva de Balaguer as members with commitments, economic and spiritual direction, numeraries, supernumeraries, or aggregates. However, in the so-called elite sect of the Catholic Church, there are also more pragmatic ways of being part of what is considered the major plan than the work of God comes to propose as an impulse of that great operational structure that every so often, as now, shows its threads. Brava to Paula on another wonderful article. You can read this article and all of the others in their entirety that we will be going over in this live stream, linked as a source document in the description below. So please feel free to take advantage of that document, share it, and share these headlines as well. Before we move on, I'm going to take a look at the chat. Hi, Ohms. Good to see you here. Yes, no, not Peter Navarro. Slick Dissident. Hi, nice to see you again. All right, we will roll right along. So this is from El Debate, written by Alex Razor. 1,000 cases of nullity, 40 years in Sweden, and translator of the Pope. Quote, we became very close friends. Jorge de Salas arrived in the Scandinavian country, quote, because they need a canonist, and ended up, years later, accompanying Francisco during his visit to Luther's 500,000th anniversary. This was written on the 3rd of April, or the 4th of April. I've noticed a lot of the time they'll put the day first and the month second, whereas in the United States we tend to do month and then day, unless you're in the military, in which case all those rules get thrown out the window. 4 decades ago, the Bishop of Stockholm asked Opus Dei for a priest to be a canonist for his diocese. The proposed man was Jorge de Salas, professor of canon administrative law at the University of Navarra, who packed his bags and headed for Sweden. There he continues, now as a judicial vicar in the diocese, carrying all the cases of marriage annulments, but he has come to Spain for a few days to participate in Zaragoza and the centenary events of the priestly ordination of St. Jose Maria de Escriva de Balaguer. So this is basically like an interview back and forth with questions. So the bold is the question and the response. The question, tell us a little bit more about how you ended up in Sweden. I wanted to read this article because, again, it's just exemplifying how people with connections to attachments, membership, and Opus Dei end up in places all around the world, places far removed from their original country of birth. And I think it's really important to be aware of the fact that that is a pretty consistent factor in how the organization works, the fact that it does send people everywhere. So anyway, he says, I am from here, from Zaragoza. I am 66 years old right now, and I've studied at the Jesuit college. Here I met Opus Dei, and the truth is that I loved it, and I linked up quite young. Shocker. I started a law degree in 75, but in 77, I went to do the third course in Barcelona in order to receive more specific training in Opus Dei. Interesting. And then, after military service, I moved to Rome to complete my studies in philosophy and theology, and John Paul II ordained me a priest in 1983. Isn't that interesting? After ordination, I returned to the University of Navarra to complete studies in canon law and to do a doctorate in canon law. The original idea was to stay there as a teacher, and I was beginning to teach when the Bishop of Stockholm, where the stable work of Opus Dei had begun, asked the regional vicar of the work to send a priest to be a canonist because I need a person to help me on the whole marriage court issue. They asked me if I was willing to go to Sweden because I had written to the prelate of Opus Dei telling him to count on me for whatever it took. I'm sure he did, which I would love. My illusion was to go to New Zealand, but they told me to go to Sweden, and I was delighted. Isn't that interesting? So he had written to the prelate of Opus Dei saying, send me wherever, anywhere you want to go, I'll go. Because that's what I would love, right? And of course, it's not as if he couldn't say that. It's not as if he could say, will you please send me to fill in the blank because I feel I have an aptitude for this place, familiarity with the culture and the people, I could help in some way, shape, or form. No, wherever you need me to go. But then he says, my illusion was to go to New Zealand. So he's admitting that he didn't want to go to Sweden. He wanted to go to New Zealand, and who can blame him? I want to go to New Zealand. But they told me to go to Sweden, and I was delighted. Of course he was, because he had no other friggin' choice, right? It's not as if he could express dissatisfaction with that, because he'd be going against the will of God. At first, it was very hard, because it is a very beautiful country, very different, very modern. Well, at first, it was not so modern, but it was a little disappointing to see that the entire Swedish model of social democracy was going down. I found myself a backward country, very closed, very Swedish, which I don't know what that means. That is, there was hardly any immigration, which came later. Now it's all different. Now it is a very open country, and the truth is that it is a great place. I'm not Swedish. I've never been to Sweden. I don't know any Swedish people, like native-born Swedish people, so I can't, like, speak for Swedes. But if you happen to know any Swedes, please let me know, like, maybe, again, something got lost in translation because this was translated from Spanish. But he's saying that he found himself in this backward country that he was delighted to go to, by the way. And he found it closed and very Swedish, which, like, no shit, dude. You went to Sweden. What were you expecting? I don't know. If I heard somebody, like, because of the fact that I do get to talk to people from all over the world, you know, and 99.9% of the people that I talk to are lovely human beings, I've got to interact with some people who obviously maybe are not so lovely, or don't like me either because they don't like my work or don't like the fact that I'm American. Like, I've had that happen before. I've had people make very, like, stereotypical kind of rude comments to me about me being an American when they themselves are from another country. And being somebody who would always try to go into a new culture or a new place that I'm not familiar with, an open mind, like ready to learn and not make snap judgments, I've always found that kind of behavior very, very off-putting. And it's like, when you realize that that's how somebody views you, it closes down the conversation. It's like, I don't want to engage with somebody who's like, thinks I'm very closed and very, you know, American, or in this case, very Swedish. That's just a personal thing. I don't know. Let me know what you think about that. Anyway, the rest of this article kind of just follows in the same vein, talking about him being in this country and the various things that he's done and blah, blah, blah. You can go and read it in its entirety if you want to. I just thought that first little bit of it was really interesting. I've been seeing a lot about this guy lately, too. This is the new, I say. He's been there since like 2023, I think. Bishop, Opus Dei bishop in New Zealand. No, not New Zealand. Iceland. Wrong hemisphere. He's in Iceland, and I keep seeing stuff about him pretty consistently. He's written a book now, and I don't know, I see lots of little articles and things about him. They're really like promoting the fact that he is there, probably because they need money, if I had to guess, just based on what I've been reading and also what I've heard about the country and the fact that the Catholic population is very small and very, very, very spread out, and they don't have a lot of like infrastructure and stuff. So I'm sure that's why he's been getting a lot of publicity. But I think it's interesting, you know, it's like I started seeing stuff about this bishop, this guy in the little picture there, going to Iceland, probably back starting in 2023, and it was pretty consistent. And now I'm starting to see articles more consistently, and maybe it's just because I'm really paying attention now and I wasn't so much before. That is totally possible. But that being said, very consistently now I'm seeing a decent smattering of articles over the course of a month about Opus Dei activities now in Sweden, Opus Dei activities in Iceland, you know, basically Opus in Scandinavia, which I think is interesting because if you are keeping an eye on geopolitics at all, you may or may not be aware that Greenland is becoming a very, very hot geopolitical commodity. And a lot of countries would like to have that little slice of land, including the United States. And I don't believe Denmark, who I think is the one who technically owns it, they are probably not too keen to give it up. But the world, you know, things are shifting, poles are melting, land is opening up as a result of that, channels that were no longer available for trade and just like circumnavigating the globe are literally thawing out and opening up. And I feel like there is a very northern gaze right now from a few pockets, political, social. There's a lot of energy and attention being paid to a part of the world that I feel like nobody was really paying much attention to 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't know. That's just my opinion, though. Hi, Michael Onyx. Glad to see you here. All right, so moving right along. This is Benigno Blanco accuses Rome and the Bishop of Tyrol of totalitarianism for the Gatzalueta case. It says totalitarian and incompatible with human rights. So this is in regard to a case that has played out in Spain concerning this Jose Maria Martinez Sanz, who is now a convicted pedophile. He was convicted in criminal court in Spain, and he's been just throwing the biggest fit you ever saw and just like freaking out about the fact that, you know, now that he's received sanctions in some capacity, and we can kind of quibble over how effective or meaningful those are, but some sanctions of some capacity from the Vatican. He's also been, you know, kicked out of Opus Dei. He has a blog where he's advocating his innocence and everything. It's just very sickening, frankly. And this is just another article discussing that, further developments. I'm going to keep a finger on the pulse of this situation. Let's see. Everybody, let me know. Doug, I see you said audio level is several dB too low. Let me know, everybody, if you can hear me all right. I know not everyone's audio is probably the most robust. But I'm going to go ahead and continue moving through this article. I'm going to continue to keep a finger on the pulse of this whole Gatzalueta situation, as well as the situation of just like what I perceive to be a alleged potential sex abuse crisis within Opus Dei. Allegedly, potentially, possibly, in my opinion, right? Like, I don't know that for a fact. It's just my pure speculation as like an observer from the outside, general member of the public. But I feel like there definitely is something there. And anyway, for that reason, I'm going to continue to focus on cases like this. So anyway, it says the lawyer and former Secretary of State Benigno Blanco criticizes in an article in the Third of the ABC the lack of procedural guarantees in the ecclesiastical condemnation of Professor Jose Maria Martinez in the so-called Gatzalueta case. In his opinion, the procedure violates basic principles of law and human rights that the Church itself promotes. The former teacher of the Gatzalueta School, Jose Maria Martinez, was sentenced to early March for sexual abuse of an alumnus in an absolutely irregular canonical process. The sentence handed down by the Bishop of Turiel, Jose Antonio Satue, called for his expulsion from Opus Dei, something that the prelature has not been able to carry out because Martinez voluntarily requested his discharge. Okay, I misspoke. He was not kicked out. He left. Similarly to how someone's saying, "You're fired," and you're saying, "No, I quit." Semantics. Martinez explained his version of events as follows. I have already insisted many times on the irregularities of the canonical process. I have been tried twice for the same alleged crime because the initial acquittal of 2015 did not like who constituted the ecclesiastical court. Legislation passed after the alleged facts applies to me. The judge in his first written communication urged me to plead guilty. Legislation is applied to me that has not been applied to any lay person. And in many institutions of the church, there are confessed pedophiles, and I am expelled from Opus Dei despite the fact that I am innocent of the crime of which I am accused. Thought you left, buddy. Thought you just left. Yeah, you requested to leave. Anyway, the whole process has turned out to be a shameful pantomime. There has never been the slightest possibility of defending myself. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Michael, for the 100 super chat. That's crazy. Thank you so much. Wow. I am so appreciative. Thank you. I saw something flashing. I look over at the chat. Thank you so much. Ohms. I remember in the Navy, I loved just exploring different countries. I had one shipmate who was with me. As soon as off the ship, he wanted to go to McDonald's. This crap guy doesn't get it. Yeah. I am prior military as well, prior Navy, actually. And there's kind of two groups. I feel like there's generally two types of people. There's the people who want to go for the culture and the history and like the experience of it all, and then there's people who just want like the same old consistent, like they go out to a bar or whatever and they're trying to get like Budweiser instead of like the local brew or something like that. Yeah, I definitely worked with people like that. Okay, glad that the audio sounded good for some people. I apologize if it is not amazing for everyone. This will be available to listen back to after the fact, after the live stream ends. So you can always come back to it if you're in a louder environment. It'll still be up, and you can pick up where you left off. Okay. On the high winds of the $100 super chat, let's push on. So this Benigno guy agrees with Martinez's bitching and moaning. And what I think is really, really interesting, I'm not going to read this entire article just because I am not going to I don't really care to give Martinez positive apologetics just because, again, he was convicted in criminal court, like in non-religious secular court. So I think it's really, really interesting how there continues to be so much media put out about this guy and about him throwing a fit about what the Vatican has done, and people choosing to carry water for this guy for whatever reason, whatever reasoning that they might have for wanting to defend this guy. And I'm, not going to make any accusations or say anything about these people because I don't know these people, but I will say that birds of a feather flock together, and that's a fact, and you can hang your hat on it. So we can speculate, what the implications there might be. But regardless, he was already convicted in a secular court. So why is everybody getting so hung up on what the Vatican does? As if at this point that has any sort of relevancy. And I guess to some people it really does. I guess to some people the Catholic Church represents a greater authority than any secular court of law. But I don't think that's right. I think that a crime is a crime, and if you are found guilty of it in any court, then that's just, that's the way that it is. And again, I think the fact that they keep harping on this, on the religious aspect of it, and like throwing a fit about that is very, very interesting. And it's pretty clear, I think, that it's coming from people who perceive the Catholic Church as a greater authority, as the authority over any other. You know, maybe at one point in my most diehard Catholicism, I might even have said the same thing. I don't know. I mean, I was a child, so, you know, we can have a conversation about how well informed that position would have been. But I think it's interesting. I think it's really, really interesting. And I think you can see that in this case really, really clearly. I don't know what you do with that, other than to just be aware of it, to be aware of it when you are interacting with people who are from a very, like, hyper-religious background or perspective. You would like to think that people's religion would not interfere with the exercise of their duty in a secular sense and a civil sense. Clearly, looking just at my country alone, clearly that doesn't happen, but I feel like that's how it should be. I don't know how we get back to it. I also don't know why this isn't showing up now. Moving on to my next article. Get this refreshed and then we'll see. Wait. I remember that this gave me a lot of trouble the other day too. And it's a really good article because it's talking about somebody's experience, what El Menudo Hiroko has meant for them. And so I wanted to read it. Let me exit and like try to go back in. It's interesting how sometimes certain web pages, don't want to refresh. But I wanted to read this article. Please do translate. Here we go. Maria Roca. The series The Heroic Minute helped me recover my family. The woman who left Opus Dei participates in a talk in Campos about the documentary. This was written, on April 5th. The driving role that a woman residing in Majorca had in the documentary series The Heroic Minute, which narrates the traumatic experience of 13 women in Opus Dei, starred in the debate that took place yesterday afternoon in Campos. Maria Roca, one of the protagonists and neighbor of the municipality, highlighted the positive consequences that the series has had in her life. Quote, "It has helped me recover my family, who has only understood me when they saw El Menudo Hiroko," end quote. Let's see if it'll translate the next section for me. The docuseries truly is amazing. It's an incredible piece of work. If you haven't seen it yet, I hope that you'll take the opportunity to go try to find it. It's excellent. I also feel like I make this request every single stream. But if anybody knows of a translation software that is not AI based, that works for translating things from, you know, any language to English, please let me know, because this is probably like my biggest hang up for working on things, is just getting through the translation. Because sometimes the internet just doesn't want to cooperate. See if we can get this going. You guys hear the vehicle beeping and backing up somewhere outside? It's a beautiful day and everybody else thought so too. All right, I don't know if the rest of this article is going to translate for me. You can go and read it in its entirety. Maybe it'll work better for you. But I think it's wonderful that, you know, this is a perfect example of this docuseries serving a higher purpose beyond just, you know, raising awareness about Opus Dei. It's helping facilitate healing for people because, I mean, Opus Dei is a very unique animal. And unless you are willing to devote a significant amount of time, which, frankly, who has the time? Most people, to really like dig into it and understand it. Unless you can do that, it's going to be really, really difficult to understand what a family member or a friend has gone through. Couple that with the fact that, that family member or friend was prohibited from having, any type of connection with you while they were on the inside, any type of particular friendship, so that adds to the like trying to rebuild those streams of communication and everything after the fact can be really, really difficult. And a series like The Heroic Minute helps to bridge that gap because it illustrates some of those concepts, some of the reality for people in Opus Dei that can just be really, really difficult for an outsider to grasp and understand. So wanted to highlight that. I think it's a really wonderful article. If you read Spanish or if you just have a better internet situation, go and check it out and read the whole thing. It's pretty good. On another note, and this is just, I like to pull from many different sources, including directly from the horse's mouth. So I feel like at least once or twice every single live stream I end up going over an article that was published on Opus Dei's own website. And I don't know why the formatting is like it is, but I'll scroll for you. It says new co-directors for the Caribbean Region Communications Office. So we've got some new people, not from the area, I'm going to guess, who are being sent in to the Caribbean region. It says Monica Zabrano and Daniel Villarroel, sorry about not being able to pronounce that last name, are taking over as directors of the Communications Office in a year dedicated to hope and in the midst of preparations for the centenary of Opus Dei. So they're gearing up for Opus Dei's 100th, big 100 birthday. Let's see. Over here it says that the original vicar of Opus Dei, Father Ignacio Rodriguez Mays, appointed Monica Zambrano and Daniel V. as co-directors of the Opus Dei Communications Office for Venezuela and the Caribbean. It says that Monica and Daniel worked on the Conversations Project and the campaign for the 50th anniversary of St. Josemaría's visit to Venezuela, respectively. Both of these young professionals have the knowledge and experience necessary to continue spreading the message that St. Josemaría left to the universal church in their social life and their religious convictions through social media and other means of communication. I think it's interesting how they said that they're there to continue spreading the mission, continue spreading the message that St. Josemaría left to the universal church, not the continue spreading the message of Christ's love or the message of, eternal life or anything like that. No, specifically the message that Josemaría left to the universal church. And what is that message exactly? Your guess is as good as mine. And I'm sure they would say that it's one very specific thing. Very blasé and unthreatening sounding, but I think you'll forgive me if I find that a little bit difficult to believe. All right, let me look at the chat real quick. Michael Onyx asked, who will be the new pope? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Anybody have any theories? If this cardinal is from Hungary, then we're screwed. Yeah, I think out of everybody, he'd be pretty much as bad as it could get, at least as far as continuing to see any type of substantial progress made for clarifying how Opus Dei functions within the Catholic Church and what it can and cannot tell people to do and everything else. So I don't know who it's going to be. I did see there was this really funny 3-part little series that somebody did on YouTube Shorts, and I can't remember the creator's name, and I should give him his flowers, but it was basically like a spoof of like The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, or some other reality TV show, but instead of those people, it was like the popes. And so every single video he would go over the different popes, where they were from, what their like tagline was. It was all very silly and like lighthearted, which honestly I appreciated, just because I am obviously paying attention to what is happening in the Vatican, but at the same time, I no longer live my life according to what the Catholic Church says or what anybody in the Vatican says. So while I am paying attention to it, I am loath to give it too much of my attention and too much of my energy, just because I don't live my life according to that paradigm anymore. And that's not to say that if you are and you do care that that's bad or the wrong or anything like that. Please don't think that. That's not what I'm saying. Clearly, if you are still a practicing Catholic with an invested interest in what happens to the Catholic Church, clearly you are concerned and you are paying attention. And I 100% understand and empathize. And, you know, as long as your intentions are coming from a good place, then I sincerely hope that, you know, you see a leader come in who is prepared to continue leading the church in a more positive direction. That is what I can say about it as somebody who's no longer involved in this whole thing. But, well, you know, not invested in it as much, although I guess I'm still involved. You can never really escape, right? Anyway, let's move on. I don't know who the new pope's going to be, but we should talk about this. This article, since it was published 3 months ago, but for whatever reason, it came up in my news alerts, and I didn't remember reading it at the time, and I wanted to read through it now, just because George Pell is somebody that I've kind of been keeping an eye on for a really long time, regardless of whether or not I've like spoken on it. And so for that reason, and also because of the fact that he is connected to Opus Dei, although not in any like official capacity, but like through the people that he knows and that kind of thing. He's also, some might say, kind of responsible for Opus Dei becoming so popular or so successful in Australia. So there's another connection there as well. But even though this was published back January 31st, I wanted to read it. It says, victims of sexual abuse by George Pell receive compensation under redress scheme. It says 2 men abused by the late Cardinal George Pell in the 1970s have been granted compensation by the federal government's National Redress Scheme, despite Pell being acquitted of separate criminal charges by the High Court in 2020. One of the men was offered a payment just 5 weeks before Pell died in January 2023, after it was accepted by the scheme that he was groped on the genitals by Pell at a public swimming pool in Ballarat, according to an investigation by the ABC and the Monthly magazine. The man, who was just 8 years old when he encountered Pell, who was Archbishop of Melbourne and then Sydney before being appointed by the Pope to one of Vatican's most senior positions in Rome, received $45,000 from the scheme for the alleged abuse, which is a pittance, I think. But then again, how do you even begin to quantify something like that? I don't even know. The National Redress Scheme report on Pell's conduct said children could be thrown without touching their genitals and that it was, quote, not incidental touching, which was contrary to community standards of the time. The other victim received compensation after the scheme was persuaded Pell had raped the then 9-year-old student at Ballarat St. Francis Xavier Primary School. The rape occurred in the school's gym after the boy had stolen Pell's cardigan, but the late cardinal was never charged over the incident. In his complaint to the scheme, according to the ABC report, the man wrote, I remember him saying, pull your pants down. I thought he was going to whip me with his belt. He didn't. It was very painful. I was bleeding from my bottom afterward, the victim wrote. The man was granted $95,000 in compensation from the scheme, which is capped at $150,000, and none of his account was disputed, according to the ABC. The Catholic Diocese of Ballarat has disputed the men's accounts of historical abuse, but under the scheme is liable to pay the redress amount. Arnold Thomas and Becker principal lawyer Jody Harris told this masthead she was aware of further incidents of historical abuse involving Pell. We believe that there are other victims who have not found the courage to come forward in relation to Pell. Anecdotally, we have heard stories from clients, some who are potential witnesses, but have not yet come forward. But we know from previous cases that the church will fight these claims, which could put some people off, Harris said. She said seeking compensation under the National Redress Scheme often resulted in poor financial outcomes for victims of abuse. The government scheme has a lower burden of proof than the criminal justice or civil court systems and awards compensation on the basis that abuse occurring at an institution such as the Catholic Church was reasonably likely. The scheme was founded by the federal government in 2018. The Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference declined to comment on Friday on compensation payments made to victims of Pell's historical offending. The dismissive response within the Diocese of Ballarat to abuse complaints spanning at least 3 decades was driven by a desire to avoid scandal and protect the Church's reputation, the report found. Retired priest Father Kevin Dillon told this masthead there had been no meaningful change in the Catholic Church's response to clerical abuse over the past 30 years. Quote, "This will continue to rear its ugly head as long as the institutional church does not acknowledge the incredible damage that has been done on its watch and in many cases with its knowledge. Royal commissions and parliamentary inquiries have done what they can, but the missing link is the failure of all churches to face up to their individual and institutional responsibilities to victims and their families." You can go and read that article down below. And all I can say, truly, is that at least the son of a bitch is dead. Here's another article. This was written April 7th, so this is from the past month. Is Cardinal George Pell a saint? LOL. It was written by Michael Sean Winters, published on NCR Online. So, this is interesting. So, Michael writes, I got an email from the Napa Institute founder, Tim Bush, on the subject line, with the subject line, Cardinal George Pell's First Miracle. The email linked to an article at the Catholic News Agency, which reported that Archbishop Anthony Fisher of Sydney, Australia, claimed that a toddler in Arizona was healed miraculously through the intercession of his late predecessor, Cardinal George Pell. Is there an Arizona, Australia? Hang on, let me look. Doesn't look like it. Okay. So if there is no, this is so interesting. So many layers. First thing, all right, we'll just work for it. I got an email from the Napa Institute founder, Tim Bush. That name is legendary on this channel, I think, in my opinion, at this point, because I have been researching Tim Bush and his various interesting connections with various interesting organizations and people, including Opus Dei, since 2020, when I first became aware of him. The Napa Institute is his little brainchild that, if memory serves, he co-founded with a couple of other people, including a priest with connections to EWTN. And don't quote me on that 100%. If you are wanting to refresh your memory, and I should refresh mine as well, the episode that I did back over the summer about Opus Dei and Project 2025 would be a good place to start. Word to the wise, though, yes, I do mispronounce a few names in that video. No, there is nothing I can do about it. Yes, I have been corrected a million times. It is what it is, but I talk about Tim Bush and the Napa Institute in that episode because they are connected to Leonard Leo, who is connected to Project 2025 and a lot of the other stuff that has been happening in this country. So, you know, I clicked on this article when I got it in my news alert inbox or whatever, because obviously I could see like Opus Dei mentioned in there. It comes up at some point, but I didn't see the first line until I actually started to read it. And so it's like Napa Institute, boom, Tim Bush, boom. And then they're talking about Cardinal George Pell's first miracle. Okay, I find that dubious and hard to believe. But then it says that there's this Anthony Fisher of Sydney, Australia. Okay, somebody in Australia who claimed that a toddler in, I'm thinking Australia, right? No, Arizona, was healed miraculously through the intercession of his late predecessor. I am so confused and I have so many questions. The Napa Institute is in California, although they are opening up a branch of it in Washington, D.C., I believe. George Pell was in Australia. This Anthony Fisher Bishop is in Sydney, Australia. This toddler is in Arizona. It's like, none of this makes sense. None of the people. Has anybody asked the toddler? Oh, here's the toddler. I just think that there's so much in that first paragraph. I'm just scanning through this. I don't know how much of this I want to read. So Michael says, I hope Pell is in heaven, that he is, in fact, a saint. When St. Pope John Paul II canonized St. Jose Maria Escriva, the founder of Opus Dei, I was visiting friends in Mexico City. We went to Mass with Donna Clara, the matriarch of the family, and afterwards took her to lunch. She asked me what I thought of Escriva being canonized despite all the controversy surrounding him and the organization he founded. I am delighted, I told her. You are? She asked. Yes, I said. If a megalomaniac like Escriva can become a saint, there is truly hope for us all. Good God. Megalomaniacs and pedophiles, huh? What a bunch. We will be reading more about Tim Bush and the Napa Institute here in a little bit. All right, so this is from Animal Politico. They've been publishing some fantastic articles about the developing situation with Opus Dei and the former members in South America. I feel like I've read one of their articles every single stream so far this year, and this is from April 7th. Quote, the poorer, the easier it is to isolate them. Former members of Opus Dei reveal modus operandi to capture women as servants. Members of Opus Dei hierarchy reveal how the plan was carried out to recruit poor women as maids and establish a work system at the cost of their faith. This was written by Paula Bistagnino and Gloria Pina. The founder of Opus Dei, Jose Maria Escriva de Balaguer, said that good administration is neither seen nor heard. By administration, he referred to the set of women engaged in domestic care and service for members in the house of the work of God. Neither seen nor heard meant that men, numeraries, and priests should not speak to or look at them. We couldn't even tell them thanks when they served us the table, which was the only time we crossed paths with them, says former Mexican numerary member Oscar Castillo, who many years after leaving still remembers the impact that caused him to see the unworthy treatment imposed on auxiliary numeraries. We had to pretend they didn't exist, like robots, adds a former priest of the organization who lived decades supported by women of scarce resources recruited from young ages. These are just two of the testimonies of Mexican members of hierarchy. Oh, so here, you can read Maids of God through Mexicans narrate how they're subjected to labor exploitation by Opus Dei. I went over that in a past live stream. You can go and find it there, or you can go and pull it up and read it in the source document down below. But in reference to that, they say, these are just two of the testimonies of Mexican members of hierarchy of the institution that is part of the Catholic Church, and that after the publication of the report, Political Animal Maids of God, they decided to contribute their experience and even account their participation in the recruitment and submission of women in vulnerable situations who were trained by the Opus Dei to be servants of the secular and religious elite. I want to take a moment to express appreciation for the fact that there are people now who were involved in Opus Dei government, essentially at various levels throughout the administration, who are coming forward and are willing to talk about what they experienced, what their perspective on everything is, the impact that the things that they saw and did had on them. Because there's an element here where people who are victims of a system end up perpetrating that same system against other people and creating more victims. And so it creates this really heartbreaking situation where when people come to grips with the fact that that is what happened, that they were in a system that exploited them and caused them to exploit others, coming to grips with that and finding some way to like heal through that and be okay with that on a certain level is really, really difficult. It's really difficult to admit that, for one, you were coerced or tricked or love bombed or whatever into joining something that became so terrible that you fell for it, right? You know, because there's this misguided idea that only stupid people join cults, right? Which is untrue, patently false. Anyone can fall into a cult. But there's that element at play. But then also these people, a lot of them ended up turning around and working to recruit other people, or working to maintain the structure and like daily norms within these centers as directors and everything. And so now they also have that guilt that they're carrying. Like I think people take on some of the guilt that should belong to the organization, they take on to themselves. And so that adds another layer that even further compounds whether or not people are able to speak about the things that happen to them. So the fact that there are people now who are willing to do that, which is not fucking easy, I want to take a moment to express appreciation for that. And if you are someone listening to this now who has been in a situation like that, where you were coerced or, you know, placed in an unhealthy environment that you recognized harmed you, in which you also potentially harmed other people, please know that I do not judge you, and that your experiences are valid, and that there are so many reasons why people do the things that they do when they're in these environments. And it's not simply whether someone is weak-willed or emotionally like unable to see the forest for the trees or anything like that. There's so much that goes into it, especially when you're talking about a cult. So sending love to anyone who is in that position, because I know how difficult that it is. I also want to mention this artwork that they've been putting up in these articles about Opus Dei. I went and followed the artists. Their ats are here below this image on the screen. And I went and followed them on Instagram just because I think the art is really, really good, especially this one right here. I mean, you've got the hand with the rosary wrapped around it, right? And they're holding a bunch of pills. And you've got it's a woman or a younger person who's like head in their hands, defeated. That is a posture of defeat. And you have like this really interesting set of structures in the image too, where you have like, they look like little huts or little shacks, and it's obviously like poor. And then in the background you have like these sort of beautiful spires extending up through the trees, and it's like very lofty and beautiful. And then over top of these structures, these like kind of shacks or huts, that's what the hand is reaching over with the pills and the rosary, like casting a shadow, if you will. I don't know, that's how I interpret it. I think this art is really, really good. It hits me in the feels. Anyway, reading on. For decades, Opus Dei had boarding schools, which functioned as training centers for maids and service personnel in Mexico City and various states of the country, such as Morelos, Tlaxcala, Jalisco, Nuevo Leon, among others. Although the promise of Opus Dei for these women is to give them education in the hospitality sector, shortly after their entry, they are awarded care and domestic hygiene tasks for the houses of the same religious institution without remuneration, at forced marches, and in a strict regime of religious submission to sanctify through their work. The pressure of faith and maintaining traditions to become part of Opus Dei made dozens of them, much of their lives working in service for the elite lay male members, numeraries, and priests, cleaning rooms, preparing food, washing, and amending clothing. Laura Rosales was a numerary, a celibate member with the commitment to chastity and obedience of Opus Dei for 33 years. She entered the work when she was 15 years old in Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, and trained in the ESDAI School of Hospitality and Services, founded in 1969 by the Civil Association of the Opus Dei Home and Culture. Since 1989, incorporated into the academic offer of the Pan American University. Throughout her life within the work, she was linked to work in the administrations and centers of the auxiliary numeraries, both in Mexico City and in other states of the country, including Hacienda Toshi in the state of Mexico and the school center Mimia Hoppen in Tlaxcala. We went to the ranches and towns. Sometimes we went to churches, but more to primary schools, to 6th grade, and then also to 3rd grade for technical schools, Rosales says. In general, several traveled with select numeraries, and they arrived along the paved road. We arrived, and they already received us because previously a priest or some director had coordinated with the school or with another priest of the town, recalls the woman who made these excursions both in the state of Tlaxcala and in the state of Mexico. We carried brochures from the institutions and were told not to mention Opus Dei. We offered girls a training plan that would allow them to work in hotels, restaurants, hospitals. Also, we asked for the grade lists and chose the best averages, they remember. At the same time, they visited the families of the young women because, in addition to convincing the parents, they had to make an evaluation of the parental nucleus to know the confirmation of the family, if they were married to the church, if the children were baptized, to find out about their moral and religious ideas. In cases where parents questioned whether their daughters resided full-time in boarding schools, often far from their homes, they should only tell them to discuss this with the village priest, and they always supported us. The selection of the towns to which they would go to look for girls was not random. There were a number of criteria related to the profile of the women they were looking for. They focused on places outside the big cities. Quote, the poorer, the more isolated in communications, and therefore easier to keep the women isolated, explains the Mexican religious who were part of the Opus Dei for several decades, but she refers not to give details that allow her to be identified. I lapsed into saying she instead of he because I assumed it messed up the tense or the gender. But this individual who said that the poorer, the more isolated, the better, basically, that was a former priest of Opus Dei who is choosing to be anonymous because he's still a priest today. He entered as a very young numerary and then made his religious journey at the request of the institution. From the 1980s, he began to have management positions and had a close link with auxiliary numeraries, something that numeraries are not allowed, right? Because even the auxiliary numeraries have to be able to go to confession, right? And they're only going to go to confession to like an Opus Dei priest. And there are some real concerns in there about the confessional seal, and whether that is being respected by priests of Opus involved in Opus Dei, because there have been a few accounts from former members, more than a few actually. If you go on Opus Libris, there's a decent smattering over the years from several people saying that while they were in Opus Dei, they noticed that like they would go to confession one day, and then like that next day or later that week they'd have like their chat or whatever with their director, spiritual advisor, whatever, and things that they had like mentioned during confession would like kind of come up during the chat, creating the feeling for these people that somehow information that they had divulged under the seal of the confessional, which is supposed to be like a completely like sacred, nothing can penetrate that. You can't even like, a judge couldn't subpoena a priest and demand that he tell him things that were told to that priest in a confessional. Like, it's a big deal. That there are concerns that that is being completely usurped by priests in Opus Dei who are feeding information to directors or whoever these spiritual advisors are, to use against the members themselves. That has been alleged. That's been mentioned in numerous cases, not only Opus Libris, but also Opus Dei Exposed. I've never looked on ODAN, but I wouldn't be surprised. And it's also mentioned in the 2023 Institutional Ecclesiastical Complaint that Antonio Moyo et al. Submitted to the Vatican. So, very concerning. But this is also an interesting article because it's, just to circle back, sorry, it was a tangent, because it's giving insight, it's solidifying, adding weight to the things that former members have said happened to them. Like, you know, these women who have said like, oh, I was recruited from a really poor area, like I didn't have access to resources, and this very charming person, priest or layperson, said that like I could apply and get a scholarship for this like hospitality school, and like I could get certifications to work in hospitality, and like they will like give me the training and the lodging, and it won't be a strain on my family. And I mean, who wouldn't want those things for their child if they live in like an economically disadvantaged area, right? But those accounts have been doubted by a lot of people, by people within Opus Dei, and also by people carrying water for Opus Dei. Like, basically denying or disbelieving that that's something that could happen. But here we have people who not only were within the institution, but also were going out and recruiting these individuals, saying, no, this is exactly how it's done. Like, we went to these really isolated areas that had limited communication with the outside world. Like, we were interested in people who were smart, but like disadvantaged because they'd be desperate, right? I mean, it doesn't say that, but like, that's how I perceive it. That's the only reason, especially considering what happens to these women. Allegedly they were, coerced and never paid and forced to work these insane hours and blah blah blah. All the rest, the human trafficking and everything of it all. This adds weight to that, and that's why I wanted to include this. This is a pretty long article. It's like a 25-minute read, so I'm not going to go through it all here. But if you'd like to read it, you can find below. And it's an awesome article. The details that they are sharing, I mean, it's reconfirming what I already know, what a lot of you listening already know, right? Since if you've been following along for a while now on this deep dive into this organization that I've been doing, none of this stuff is really news, but it's more confirmation on top of everything else, and it's being carried by news media, which is significant, I think, especially in Latin America, because the Opus Dei presence in those countries is so much more significant. So that's why we mention it. Let me take a look at the chat as we're moving along here. Oh, food cart. That's interesting. You're saying that Tim Bush started the Red Hat Report to dig up dirt on non-Opus Dei sympathetic cardinals. Maybe I had heard that, but I think it had slipped my mind. So thank you for reminding me. Yeah, Tim Bush, he's an interesting guy. I probably could do like a standalone deep dive into just him, like his professional career and everything, publicly available information. Just that alone, there's a lot there. But I got to be honest with you, I did so much of it when I was looking into the whole Opus Project 2025 connection that like I'm kind of loath to get back into it. But he is an interesting person to be aware of for your own research purposes, especially if you're in the United States and you're trying to learn more about the kind of like Opus web and how it works with everything. Anthony said, I need to learn more about Opus Dei recruitment tactics. If you want to learn more about anything Opus Dei, I highly recommend Opus Libros, which is a Spanish site where former members basically post like little articles or write in letters or whatever about their experiences, their time in Opus Dei. There's a wealth of information on that site, plenty to keep you busy for years. But if you want something that is maybe the interface is a little bit easier to use, there's Opus Dei Exposed on Reddit. And that forum, that community, has a whole bunch of information as well. You can just search based on like keyword and it'll return posts. Opus Libris basically works the same way, but that if you want to learn more about how Opus Dei works, I would direct you to those places. I mean, obviously you can like consume my content as well, and I hope that you will, but I always want to direct people back to the sources of all of this information, which, this what got me started on this was not my like own crazy theories or anything like that. It was finding the accounts and experiences, testimonies from former members, and bringing those more to a mainstream audience. So I always try to direct people back to that source, back to the people who lived through this stuff and know it better than anyone, what it's actually like. Because, I can regurgitate information here, and I think that there is value in that in its own way, but I don't want to take away from the very hard work that former members, victim survivors have put in to get their stories and their testimonies and everything out. Because at the end of the day, those are the people that we need to be listening to much more so than any other talking head, myself or anyone else. Let's see. Food Cart said, when Opus Dei tried to recruit me, it was as a young professional paying too much in rent in a large city. I sat next to a supernumerary on a train, and he got me to give a talk at an Opus Dei space after a convo. Yeah, that's how it begins. Young professionals, people in cities, especially around universities. I mean, universities, the Opus Dei presence around any like successful university is pretty apparent if you know where to look, and it's because they're interested in connecting with and developing relationships with, fostering, bringing in these young professionals, bright young people who are going to become the people who are shaping the future of our world. And there's a good reason for that. It's not accidental. There's a very good reason for that. And if you want to know more about sort of Opus Dei's trajectory and history over a broader scale course of time, I would highly recommend Gareth Gore's book Opus, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church. That came out last year in October. Excellent. You can also go and listen to my interview. Got to have him on and have a conversation with him for the Deep Dive Project, which is awesome. So you can listen to that as well. And then there's a book by a woman who was an Opus Dei numerary. She worked with Escriva personally. Her name was Maria del Carmen Tapia, and she wrote a book called Inside Opus Dei, which you can find pretty much anywhere on Amazon, and I have it linked on my website. But those two books give you really good insight into the development and the history of the organization, how they've moved into various parts of the world, the United States, Latin America, etc. Yeah. For those who want to know, the information is abundant, especially now. We have more and more books being written, more and more people speaking out. There really truly is no excuse for anyone like being blindsided by any of this information. And for those who want to know, the information is there. Happy hunting. So moving right along, this article, I believe, let me see, does it say at the was translated, I want to say this was translated from like Polish, but it says, who is Marcin Romanowski? He lives in celibacy, takes the rosary to the border. You didn't know that about politics. So this is about an interesting fellow that I never heard of before, but I want to talk about him now because, well, he lives in celibacy, so you can probably guess where this is going. It says, the echoes of Marcin Romanowski's case are not silent. The politician is still to be arrested. Even an arrest warrant was issued for him, but since December 19th, he has been under the protection of political asylum granted to him in Hungary. On April 2nd, the Prosecutor General's office announced the issue of a European Investigation Order, END, for the politician, who is Romanowski. So I remember when this first happened, or I first saw headlines saying that he fled his country to like seek asylum in Hungary, and it's for reasons that are kind of just like, I think, political, financial. I'd probably get into it here. We'll read about it. But anyway, he has ties to Opus Dei, which was really, really interesting. He fled to a country with a good Opus Dei presence, and now they want to arrest him. So let's read through this a little bit. It says, Marcin Romanowski was born on January 20th, 1976 in Squirlino, I apologize for pronunciations, in the Kuyavian-Pomeranian voivodeship. He graduated from law studies at the Nicholas Copernicus University in Torun and postgraduate studies at the University of Regensburg. He defended his doctorate in Roman law at the University of Cardinal Stefan Wisniewski in Warsaw. Where does Marcin Romanowski currently live? After leaving the country, the politician lived in Budapest, Hungary. According to the arrest warrant issued earlier, he stayed in Poland, mainly in Warsaw and Gilau, a small village in the Bilgoraj Powiat in the Lublin region. He began his political career with a failed attempt to win the mandate of the Warsaw Councillor in 2002. In the following year, he was an expert on the Rewind scandal. Twice, he was an advisor to the Minister of Justice. Romanowski was also the director of the Institute of Justice. He was undersecretary and then state in the Ministry of Justice. So it says, does Marcin Romanowski have a wife and children? The politician is a numerary of the Catholic organization Opus Dei, which means that he undertook to live in celibacy, so nothing is known about his wife and possible children, because they don't exist. Morrison is considered a man with a strong moral backbone. First of all, because he boldly defends his traditional and conservative worldview, which is not what everyone likes. This is not someone who says what others want to hear. He says what he thinks is right, regardless of the consequences. One of his colleagues in Sovereign Poland speaks of Romanowski. Romanowski is a great opponent of LGBTQ+. In the media, he called this community institutionalized deviation. He also boasted that on the Polish-Belarusian border for his homeland, he prayed with the rosary. What a guy. In July, the Sejm granted the prosecutor's office's request and waived the immunity of former Deputy Minister of Justice Marcin Romanowski. 250 out of 434 deputies voted in favor. Opposed were 178 and 6 abstained. The Sejm also gave permission for detention and detention on remand. On Monday, July 15th, ABW officers detained Romanowski in his apartment in Warsaw. His representative informed in the media that the detention was calm, but his client had to undress with officers, which he considered humiliating. Marcin Romanowski is one of the main characters of the so-called Mraza tapes, which are evidence in the ongoing scandal around the Justice Fund. Prosecutors are investigating the matter of the fund's expenses during the time of Zbigniew Ziobro, which were to go to the victims of crime, and according to the arrangements, they were allocated for completely different purposes. So we've got misallocation of funds, and I'm going to guess that that is probably a big part of the reason why he fled. But yeah, so they haven't taken him into custody yet, or at least as of this article, they hadn't. I haven't seen anything in any of my news alerts. If you know something different, definitely feel free to sound it off down below. But very interesting situation, and I kind of just watch it with like amusement. I don't have any hot takes or really, other than just to say like, here's another Opus Dei person doing Opus Dei things. Sometimes that's the only point, just to illustrate the fact that like this organization's around, and even though, you know, it says it has 90,000 members or whatever, that's not a huge number of people, even though it's relatively small. When the people that it has are people like Marcin Romanowski or like Timothy Bush or Leonard Leo or, you know, whoever, Javier Milei, then it becomes a little bit more significant. Then it starts to matter. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to question what types of organizations and ventures and ideologies our civil leaders are involved in or sympathetic to. I think you can tell, because you can tell a lot about a person by what they support and the ideas that they give weight to and the ideologies that they support, either, you know, verbally, publicly, or kind of in the back end via funding and that kind of thing, you know, if you just follow the money. I think it's perfectly reasonable to question and then to be critical of people when they are parts of organizations that are kind of crappy, like Opus Dei, you know. I mean, it's my opinion for sure. I think plenty of other people probably agree with me now at this point. Opus Dei kind of sucks. And when you find out that somebody is involved in or connected to that organization, doesn't it make you look at them just a little bit differently? Makes me look at them differently. It makes me question every motive that they've ever had, every action that they've ever taken. That's just me, though. All right, so here's an article. It's supportive of Opus Dei. Nobody can accuse me of not giving airtime to the good stuff about Opus Dei, right? People are always real mad at me because I never talk about the good stuff. This is a failed attempt to malign Opus Dei. This is an op-ed, okay? So this William Donahue thinks that Gareth Gore flubbed the ball, just made a big goof trying to write Opus. And this is what he has to say about it. William writes, Opus Dei is loved by millions of Catholics all over the world for its yeoman efforts in getting Catholics to practice their religion more seriously. Then he says it was founded in 1928 by Escrivá, spiritual home, lay Catholics religious, and the Escrivá was canonized by JP2 in 2002. Militant secularists and many so-called progressive Catholics hate Opus Dei. Why? It symbolizes everything they detest. It is unashamedly Catholic, Orthodox, and wildly successful. We'll see. The latest effort to trash Opus Dei is a book by Gareth Gore. Opus, like so many who hate the organization, he is caught up in the mystique of Opus Dei. He can't understand why men and women are drawn to an entity that is so deeply religious, especially given the decidedly secular bent of Western civilization. On top of that, he is a sloppy writer. His book is strewn with hyperbole, innuendo, and out-and-out falsehoods, yet he had the audacity to say in an interview that his book is 100% correct. Here are a few examples of his inattention to detail. During a trip to Nicaragua, the Pope refused to let one cardinal kiss his ring because he had disobeyed a papal order. But Ernesto Cardinal was not a cardinal, he was a priest. More important, he was Minister of Culture who worked for the communist dictator Daniel Ortega, the Sandinista thug who has impoverished and enslaved the people of Nicaragua. He is still doing this today. With good reason did JP2 rebuke him. Gore says that Mother Teresa of Calcutta attended the beatification of St. Jose Maria. She did not. Also, when he died, the servants did not have to be awakened in the middle of the night to make preparations. He died in the middle of the day. Blah, 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 blah. There are a few other things. Now, in this William Fellowes defense, what I will say is that I think, did Opus fail to malign Opus Dei? I guess that depends on the opinion of the reader. William Donahue feels like it was a failure. I, on the other hand, feel like it was an excellent attempt to encapsulate what Opus Dei is, illustrate why it's a problem within our society, and present the information in a readable way for the people of this world. That's my opinion. But in William Donahue's defense, what I do see I kind of see where he's coming from to a degree. Don't get mad at me. Gareth Gore made the mistake that a lot of people make when they are not raised Catholic, aren't from a Catholic background. He made some errors in the ways that he referred to certain people, recounted certain events, simply because I think he's not from a Catholic background. He wasn't raised Catholic. He's never been Catholic. He's not lived in that world. So there's a lot of lore that you learn when you are a practicing Catholic that you just kind of have floating around in the back of your head that someone who's not from that environment won't have. So yes, I think that there were a couple of places where Gareth made a couple of errors in the ways that he presented things, phrased things, recounted things. That is what it is. I don't think that that necessarily means the entirety of the book is bunk, of course. But then also, he said here that also when he died, the servants did not have to be awakened in the middle of the night to make preparations. There is a post right now on Opus Dei Exposed. It was posted about a week ago, I think, something like that, where somebody posted sharing a link to an article that was published on Opus Libris, where this person talks about how when it wasn't Escriva who passed away and had people woken up to pray for him in the middle of the night or whatever, it was Escriva's successor, Alvaro del Portillo. So, okay, let me pull this up. How am I going to pull this up? I don't have it linked. I should have pulled it up, but I forgot about this. If you go and look at Opus Dei Exposed, you can probably find it. But at any rate, Gareth misreported in Opus that when Escriva died, people in the council were woken up to pray for him. And that is not true. And it's probably because whoever told Gareth that story misremembered it or had heard it incorrectly from their source. And in this article on Opus Libris, it clarifies the entire thing and says that it wasn't Escriva, it was Alvaro del Portillo. And yes, people were woken up, people in the administration or whatever were woken up to pray for him. And this person alleged that it was only the women. It was only the women who were woken up to pray for ADP's soul or whatever when he was like gasping his last breaths. So it's kind of splitting hairs. Technically, yes, in that particular situation, Gareth was incorrect. Technically, it wasn't Escriva, but he got the meat and taters of it right, which is that people were woken up out of the, in the dead of night, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that, to pray for this dying man's soul. People who are already sleep deprived, people who are already, working their fingers to the bone, trying to keep this entire thing in the air. That was still correct. Like that is still correct. And the meat and taters of Gareth Gore's book as a whole is correct. And it's really, really unfortunate that little details like that were missed, either because Gareth himself didn't know, or his sources didn't know that the information wasn't exactly correct, or whatever, some like misunderstanding just with like because of the fact that Gareth's not Catholic. It's sad that that stuff will detract from the overall value of Opus as a book exposing this organization. Because, you know, people who are looking to be comforted and reassured that Opus Dei is not a malignant force in our world, because, you know, maybe they're seeing things on social media, hearing things in the news, whatever, they'll find articles like this and they'll read this stuff and they'll be like, oh, see, this guy, he doesn't even know what he's talking about. Like, nobody was woken up when Eskrova passed away, and like Mother Teresa didn't even go to his funeral, so like he doesn't even know what he's talking about, you know. Like, that's what will become the narrative, and that's how it'll get spun, and that's unfortunate. So I don't really know what you do about that. I guess my only hope is that if somebody were trying to determine whether or not they should read this book, this wouldn't be the only article that they would read as they're trying to form their opinion. That's all we can hope. But yeah, I wanted to go over it because I thought it was interesting, and again, because it introduces that whole conversation about like the little minor details. You get one or two of those things wrong and they will tear you to shreds over the entirety of your message. I mean, that kind of happened to me, again, with that whole Project 2025 video, because I mispronounced Leonard Leo's first name, I mispronounced the Koch brothers' last name, and a couple of other things. You know, in my defense, I'd never heard of these people before getting into all of this and learning about how all of this stuff ties into like the politics of my country and everything. I learned about all of these people relatively recently in the like lifespan of or history of my life. And so I got those things wrong, and people eviscerated me for it in the comments of that video, even though, regardless of whether or not I was mispronouncing Leonard's name, the things that Leonard is doing are still the things that Leonard is doing. So, yeah, it sucks. It's something that I feel like every single writer, journalist, anyone who puts like their neck out with information, eventually somebody's going to come along and try to cut you down for size over a detail that you got wrong or something like that, just to discredit anything else that you're saying. And you know what? I guess if people want to do that, that's fine. If that's how people, if there are people who want to engage with information and with the world in that way, that's fine. I guess I don't really want those kind of people around me or in my orbit anyway, so like it's no real loss. But it is interesting, and it happens all the time, and this is a perfect example of that. If you have read Opus, you'll have to let me know in the chat what you thought of it. I am probably going to reread it at some point this year, just because there's so much information in there that I think I could go through it a second time and it'd be like reading a whole new book. And I am sort of toying with the thought of doing that like chapter by chapter here on the Deep Dive Project, like live or something like that, but I have not made a firm decision on that one way or the other, so don't hold me to that. But if you've read it, let me know what you think, and if you have read it already, do you think you want to reread it? It's just, there's a ton in there. Alrighty, so moving along. I want to wrap up around 4 or so we got to keep booking it. So this is from The Medium. It was published April 9th. Leo Billionaires Colonizing DC's Catholic University of America. And it has a nice little image. It's from a Facebook post. It's from the Napa Institute in Washington, D.C., so they're getting established, just like Tim Bush said they would. Napa Institute is dedicated to building relationships through the year that help the church and her mission. Last night, we brought together a tremendous group of priests and laity for a night of fraternity, discussion, and great food. Special thank you to Archbishop Timothy Broglio for joining us. ... Cuts it off, but look, there you got Tim Bush right there. There's his mug. There's Leonard Leo down there, and then a whole bunch of other people. I don't really know who all these people are, but it says them in the... Oh yeah, here we go. I don't see Dominic Leggy. I know that name. Leg. Sorry if that's mispronounced that. I know the name. I don't know the face. But yeah, all these people got together in Washington, D.C., had a nice little dinner, and let's read about it. The announcement April 7th that the right-wing Catholic influencer Bishop Robert Barron will speak at Catholic University of America's commencement May 17th, 2025 was just the latest sign of the anti-Francis far-right colonization of the Catholic University of America. Unlike Georgetown, which is currently under attack by Trump, CUA has always been conservative. At a time when 8.4 cradle Catholics leave the church for every convert who crosses the Tiber, the deeply in-debt CUA has sold its soul to Team Leonard Leo billionaires. From selling the naming rights of the Catholic Business School to Tim Bush and Leonard Leo endowing a law chair to the purging of Franciscans in the campus faith office, Catholic has made a hard MAGA turn. National Catholic Reporter by John Gehring, December 12, 2022. This story is more than 2 years old, but there has been zero additional investigation or follow by the Washington Post, New York Times, or other DC mainstream media. And it was, Leonard Leo has reshaped the Supreme Court. Is he reshaping the Catholic University too? And I remember when that article came out. I may have even posted it on the Deep Dive Project Instagram page. 1. Leonard Leo has helped the cash-strapped school raise more than $20 million. 2. Leo sits on the Tim Bush Business School Board of Visitors. 3. Leo chairs Academic Affairs Committee overseeing faculty and recommending tenure. 4. The current and former CUA president will serve or served on Becket Fund Board. 5. Leo serves with Robbie George on Ethics and Public Policy Center. 6. George is a Heritage Foundation trustee who participated in hiring Opus Dei Kevin Roberts to Honcho Project 2025. Leo endows his own originalism chair at Catholic Law School. If Catholics approached the Bible the way these originalists view the Constitution, we would be fundamentalists, says one Catholic detractor. CUA began its turn from respected conservative Catholic academic to MAGA right a few years before Trump was elected in 2016. The battle over Catholic identity at Catholic University of America, that was reported. Tim Bush began putting down roots in D.C. It says Catholic Conservative Napa Institute's profile grows in Washington, D.C. Playing God by Mary Jo McConaughey details the right turn of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops located across the street from CUA. Bishop Robert Barron, a very popular influencer in the Catholic right, is giving CUA commencement address on May 17th. Bishop Barron attacks Politico journalist Heidi Przybyla for her reporting on Leonard Leo. He is the most prominent of several Catholic outlets in an orchestrated pile-on of the award-winning reporter. It says Politico journalist targeted by U.S. Catholic Bishop and Leonard Leo. Bishop Barron is not a friend of Pope Francis. According to Pew polling, 75% of U.S. Catholics support Pope Francis, just 25% of his inclusive outreach efforts in ministry. Catholic University has extensive money problems. Here's a headline that says, Catholic University of America facing $30 million deficit. Like many universities nationwide, Catholic University faces financial pressures that require decisive action. And that probably is the entire reason for the change, right? Because money talks. For every convert to Catholicism in America, 8.4 cradle Catholics leave. Dominicans and Dominic Legge have played a big role in the CUA shift MAGA right. Opus Dei recognized Legge and the Dominicans in October, giving them the DC K Street Opus Dei Award, the Thomistic Institute to receive John Paul II New Evangelization Award. J.D. Vance credits Dominic Legge for playing an important role in his conversion to Napa Opus Dei Catholicism. So there's the tie. At Tim Bush's Napa Conference 2021, JD says Dominic Legge was the first priest he spoke with about becoming Catholic. That's at minute 326 in this video. Tim Bush, openly Opus Dei, donates $15 million to CUA for naming rights to CUA Business School. The deal was brokered by Leonard Leo, who sits on the board of the DC Opus Dei Center. Leonard Leo endows a law chair at the Catholic University. Becket Fund, Robert Neal, Leonard Leo are both Becket Fund alumni. Franciscans ran the Catholic U campus ministry for 15 years, but were pushed out by Opus Dei adjacent Dominicans, seen dining with Leo and Bush in the Napa photo above. In the summer of 2022, the Franciscans were purged for being too aligned with Pope Francis' social gospel theology, according to one former campus ministry employee. Woof. So you can find this article and all of the other articles that are linked within it down below if you care to start pulling at any one of these threads. Just thought that was really, really interesting because it kind of connects everybody, including some of the people that I have been paying attention to for quite some time. And it's weird to see the way things have turned out. I never could have predicted it 6 years ago. All right, this is from InfoBay in Spain. Opus seeks 1.6 million in donations to restore an 18th century basilica that sinks because neither the Vatican nor the administrations collaborate. The Pontifical Basilica of St. Michael, owned by the Vatican and managed by Opus, begins urgent work in September. It needs 3 million and has raised 1.4 million. The rector regrets that neither the Holy See nor the public administrations have collaborated in maintaining a unique building in the Italian Baroque. This same Wednesday, rubble has been removed from the roof since the last rains have caused new damage. He resignedly points out, this is Pius Santiago, rector since last October of the Pontifical Basilica of San Miguel, a jewel of the Italian Baroque in the heart of Madrid that takes time with metal reinforcements and nets to prevent landslides. And is that the church, finished in the 18th century, does not go through its best moment. 13 years ago, the first negative report from the city council on its status came, but now repairs are urgent. The basilica cannot sink, points out the rector, exaggerating the situation a little, but without wanting to downplay the current state of the property. So, Opus Dei has managed the basilica since 1959, launched a crowdfunding campaign months ago to try to raise 2.66 million and carry out restoration works on the facades and roofs. We can no longer wait. Work must begin urgently in September, explains the rector to InfoBay Spain. Although the website is not up to date, it says 1.1 million has been raised when in fact there are already 1.4. The campaign still stands. So, I just thought that it was interesting. There are a few Opus Dei real estate issues that are kind of playing out across different places. There's a big church that people have been squabbling over. There's this now. Basically, properties that Opus Dei has managed, they're selling or trying to get funding for or being told that they need to give up. And regardless of what the situation is, Opus Dei doesn't really seem to be super happy with anything that has happened. And I would have to imagine it's probably because TBH, they just don't have the funds to do what they want to do. And the funds are not coming in as they have in the past. Also, I think, in my opinion, it seems like the organization is pivoting its focus and putting more energy into social and educational outreach and away from maintaining these big kind of grandiose buildings that nobody wants to visit just because they're realizing that, you know, for better or for worse, the times they are changing and people are changing in what they want. And in order for Opus Dei to have any kind of a hope of continuing to be able to recruit people, they are going to have to flex and change with that as well. So, yeah, $1.6 million in donations, and it's just not coming in. This next article is from Religion Digital. Bertals Sodalizio, a chifa copy of Opus Dei's Economy, the Vatican warned. So this was written by Jose Manuel Vidal on the 10th of last month. The subheadlines say, in the next few days, the decree of suppression of Sodalizio will be signed. But how many assets will be available to the liquidating pontifical commissioner to fulfill the main mission entrusted to him by the Holy Father, to repair as much as possible the damage suffered by the victims? The prestigious lawyer Jose Carlos Ugaz implicitly warns of the danger that a government will denounce the current 1980 Concordat of Peru in the future. The advantages of the Opus model would serve the Sodalizio to build a financial structure that, if it reaches 1,000 members, as Fagari insisted over and over again, would allow them to conquer the world. They did not exceed about 150. Father B, I'm just going to call him Father B because I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his last name, assisted by a small elite of Sodalites and adherents when the business of private cemeteries began at the end of the last decade of the last century, was not skillful enough in his copy chifa of the economic structure of Opus Dei. So the article goes, throughout the centuries, the institutions of the church used different ways of giving economic and legal support to their apostolate activities. Normally, they used ecclesiastical assets, that is, assets owned by the universal church, the apostolic see, or a public canonical legal person. Those belonging to private canonical legal persons who, at least explicitly, do not act in the name of the church and therefore are not subject to the supervision of the ordinary, and even less to the annual accountability to the ordinary, were left out of the place. In the coming days, the decrees of suppression of sodalitio will be signed, but how many assets will be available to the liquidating pontifical commissioner to fulfill the main mission entrusted to him by the Holy Father, to repair as much as possible the damage suffered by the victims? Furthermore, this can only be done with ecclesiastical assets, not private ones. It says, one of the first to realize, it says, apostolate in the name of the work. One of the first to realize this distinction was Opus Dei. As an institution, it always avoided owning civil or ecclesiastical property, as a study published by themselves say, so as not to compromise the church or Opus itself in economic and professional efforts. It's a CYA type situation. From the beginning, the young man, Jose Maria Escriva Albas, took this discovery seriously and only promoted the founding of merely civil entities such as the Academia Cienfuegos or the DYA. He justified it, quote, to emphasize the role of the laity and their ability to create projects in civil society with a Christian spirit and to avoid the seizure of ecclesiastical assets as occurred during the Second Spanish Republic. According to the success error method, as can be read in various articles published on the net, Opus Dei members invented corporate works with ideological commissioners appointed by the work to control their legal and economic managers in student residences in the famous Gatzalueta College or in the University of Navarra and Piura. Common works, business initiatives in the field of communications and entertainment suppressed in 1966 by the tensions caused by the directors of the work. Auxiliary companies, fully mercantile, also abolished in 1969, so as not to give the impression that the work administered them, and the personal work providing only chaplains or spiritual companions to the schools of the society for the promotion of teaching. Opus Dei, recognized by all as a Catholic group, has always avoided in Spain being identified with the Catholic Church. That's interesting. None of its properties would be either ecclesiastical or of the church. None of his initiatives could be done on behalf of the church, always camouflaged and mimicked with the landscape. In case its members had to give an explanation, their activities would be of the work. No apostolate would be of the church in the first place, but of Opus Dei, which has led to an often conflicting relationship with many bishops, successors of the apostles. And they say we have seen the last conflict with the Bishop of Barbastro Monzon. It's interesting that they say that Opus Dei has avoided being identified, correlated with the Catholic Church in Spain, because I feel like it's been the exact opposite here in the United States, actually, especially following the Da Vinci Code and their whole like Operation Lemonade response. You can still read things on the ODAN site, odan.org, where they're talking about how Opus Dei was very quick to equate any criticism of the organization because of the Da Vinci Code with criticism of the Catholic Church at large, and they sort of tried to hide behind the Catholic Church rather than being out in the front of it and standing apart from it all. So it's really, really interesting, and I wonder why that is, and why it is that they've chosen to do apparently something different in Spain than what they've done here in the United States. So let's see, they're talking about the letter being sent. Said, in my capacity as lawyer for a group of sodalitio victims, we knew that most of their assets are in private companies, directed in a personal capacity by members of the trusted environment of their leaders and their attorneys. Through a system of figureheads and names, they do not formally appear in the name of the organization and its true owners. With these words, the prestigious pro bono lawyer of some victims of sodalitio, Jose Carlos Ugaz, ad hoc prosecutor in the past for corruption cases, in particular that of Montesinos Fujimori, which was 2000 to 2002, has headed on March 24, 2025, a letter addressed to the highest hierarchs of the Catholic Church to warn them that, quote, multiple evidence appears that, through these private civil societies, priests and lay leaders of the sodalitio have committed various crimes of tax fraud and money laundering, particularly in civil societies such as the cemeteries, parks of remembrance. Oh, dang. On the other hand, this jurist implicitly warns of the danger that a government will denounce the current 1980 Concordat of Peru in the future, used to make the cemetery business viable, helped by 4 offshore companies, some as civil and canonical society, also from the Sodalizio. So the Sodalizio, in addition to some other things, is potentially being accused of money laundering. It says, unlike Opus Dei and its claim to be for laity and priests, a kind of diocese of universal scope under a prelate without being subject to the jurisdiction of the rest of the bishops, the Sodalizio was not made up of simple lay people committed to the cause, but of members consecrated in a society of apostolic life. So it's just kind of a different flavor of the same thing, is sort of what it feels to me. And they keep calling it a chifa copy of Opus Dei. Chifa, like cheap, maybe? I'm scrolling through this article. It says, most of the Sodalizio businesses initially carried out in Peruvian ecclesiastical societies were diocesan-owned and non-profit mission cement through a bit of Bartolayan financial engineering. The missions have lent each other millions of dollars to later forgive the debts generated by the loans. They have made donations to offshore companies controlled by mixed commissioners, in which the directors of the mission are the same ones who run the offshore accounts. The money has returned to Peru for uncontrolled purposes, very alien to those initially spiritual or social. They came to generate huge benefit that, in a rough estimate, would be about $1 billion. What? $1 billion. It says, find the 7 differences and win. The Sodalizio generated its business not in Spain, a country with a slightly more evolved rule of law, but in Peru with lower standards of democratic equality. But nobody was surprised that in the Valkyrie operation, it was discovered that the lawyer for Sodalizio, Huyan, had been directly involved in the corruption plot of the former state attorney general Patricia Benavides. Furthermore, Father B's economic hardcore, unlike Opus Dei, not only did not operate in a country with higher anti-corruption standards such as Spain, but was never controlled by the leaders' officers of the Sodalizio. Maintained by B as a high-born and low-bed darling, as the song would say, they always laughed at his generous protector. Never the vicious Fagari, the regal cover-up, the evasive Moroni, or the superficial former gang member Correa were interested in the least by the origin of the wealth that, without modesty, Father B with more and more greed. The true power in the shade had always been this priest, assisted by his sloppy, legally cut, such as Gonzalez Flores, Aria Alcantara, man, they're naming people, Percy Garcia, Cavaro, or Willie Ackerman, and covered by the journalist Alejandro Bermudez in the media. If Opus Dei has had a founder who has been able to be raised to the altars and enter the calendar among other Catholic saints, the Sodalizio could not avoid knowing that its founder, its first vicar, and many others were real criminals whose only calendar to upload was porn. Wow, the priestly prelature of Opus Dei has been an effective moral police, although unlike the priests of the Sodalizio, she has always stayed away from the vile metal, which only dirtied the hands of her faithful numeraries and lay supernumeraries. By converse, some priests of the Sodalizio, such as Bishop Jose Antonio Ujaran, former Archbishop of Piura, or the 2 Reverend Len, have been up to their ears in all of the most important financial decisions. On the contrary, some of his laity were those who, even sucking on the communications of their brothers or relatives, as Mons K. Schmalhassan denounced, referring to Erwin Schuch, criminally exercised police control on the sect. I'm sorry that some of this is hard to understand. Again, the translation from language of origin to English is sometimes just not pretty. It says, in addition to abuses of authority, conscience, and spirituality, among them preventing the intellectual projection of its members, Sodalizio shone with physical and sexual abuse with the consequent reputational crisis for B's business. It says, Opus, fearful of revolutionary guerrilla seizures, never wanted to have ecclesial assets. Not so the Sodalizio, which, although fearful of seizures by the hierarchy, reasons among others for the constitution of the trust, Acres Investment, in the hands of the Lima mayor of Opus Dei, Rafael Lopez Aliaga. Oh, I didn't know that. has had ecclesial assets to circumvent the payment of taxes. So much for the separation of church and state, right? Finally, Opus Dei, despite its proverbial arrogance, would never have allowed itself to challenge Vatican justice head on, specifically the Holy Father. Yeah, they're usually pretty, like, low-key about it. At least they have been recently with the stuff that Pope Francis had put out, the motu proprios and everything. So the rest of this article just outlines these differences. It says definitely all these soda lovers, that's what a good friend of mine from Lima calls them, that attack Bartomeu live in a dystopian reality made of hitman journalists and rubber fetuses in the hands of operated Barbies that celebrate express nullities. Wow, what a sentence. While the Sodalizio is dying, and with them the acolytes of infamy and iniquity, Father B, together with his faithful Hudad, rests without peace. This is an awesome article. I am planning on doing a standalone deep dive into Sodalizio just because of its similarities to Opus Dei and the fact that there are people who had an impact on Sodalizio who were also connected to Opus Dei, or like, you know, there was some like cross-contamination there a little bit. I am planning on doing a standalone deep dive into that, and this article gave me some really interesting things to look into, such as the alleged money laundering, for example, and also the very shady offshore account back and forth stuff that's going with their finances. That's really interesting. $1 billion. That's insane. That's a lot of money. So yeah, very interesting. I did not read this entire thing before I sat down to film this live. I usually don't. I'll just skim through them enough to know if it's something I really want to talk about. So it's always fun to find that stuff in there. Crazy. Let's see. The United States is ruled by militant Catholics from Opus Dei. So this is from a Czech site, or the Medium on their like Czech site. The United States is ruled by militant Catholics from Opus Dei. This was written by Matej Holland and was published on the 10th. This is not too lengthy, but it's really interesting. Here's a picture of the president, Donald J. Trump, with the First Lady, and they met Pope Francis in the Vatican. I don't know when this was. Obviously, I think it was a little while ago because Pope Francis looks like he's in pretty good health. But it says the story of the union, on the one hand, of the evangelical, but on the other, Catholic radicals from Opus Dei and their efforts to implement the 2025 project, the Holy War, and the fight against the Vatican. So, again, this is from the Medium's like Czech site, I guess in Poland or Czechoslovakia, but it's talking about U.S. affairs, which, again, like I said earlier, I am always so interested in reading perspectives of U.S. stuff from news sources that are based outside of the US, because sometimes you'll start to pick up on some things that you're not really hearing in the mainstream media so much, which I think the mainstream United States media, I should say, which I think is always interesting. But anyway, they write, J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States of America. Even now, after 2 months, by far the most prominent vice president ever sat there. One would like to say that perhaps more than the president. And also the envoy of the Catholic organization Opus Dei, which mentors the whole Project 2025, a 900-page timetable for Trumpism, which is to dig through the United States from the ground up and destroy liberal democracy. You may have noticed the anomaly, even though it wouldn't have to mean anything in itself. Although Catholics in the United States are in a significant minority, the representation in the Trump administration is significant. The Catholic is wrestler Linda McMahon, who is seated by Trump at the Ministry of Education with an official assignment to cancel it. The Catholic Elise Stefanik, ambassador to the UN, is the same, where we know Trump's assignment to. It's also Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy, as well as new CIA Director John Ratcliffe, a Republican, one of Trump's most loyal advocates, willingly spreading disinformation in support of him, and Trump's first mandate's FBI Director, and chief author of the Project 2025 Intelligence Reform section. And just J.D. Vance. Vance is a convert, visually and religiously. He previously wrote that Trump is like Hitler, to become, after Peter Thiel's intervention, probably the most influential ideologue of the Trump regime, Trump's most loyal supporter ever. Yeah, it's really funny. J.D. Vance, back in the day, when he was like first starting to step out and like do media appearances and talk and be in politics and stuff, he was not like a pro-Trump guy. So it's been really interesting to see how the turns have tabled. He also became a staunch Catholic to oversee the implementation of the 2025 project written by the Heritage Foundation. Opus Dei, a structure built for decades within the Catholic Church during its existence and the recruitment of new sheep, which they recruit and commit in priestly seminaries, and Catholic schools, has swelled considerably and is very strong. Many of Master Leonard's ciphers know it, where it is proposed in literary fiction as an age-old struggle within the Church. But in some cases, it is quite accurate. For example, furious self-whipping is not a fabrication. The founder of Opus Dei vehemently practiced it. This group disagrees with almost everything new and strives to bring the church liturgy, the Catholic teachings, and the whole world back together. He also cultivates the cult of the personality of the founder, the Spanish priest Jose Maria Escrivá de Balaguer, and has several other strongly sectarian features, forced loyalty to the assigned spiritual leader, etc. Its roots must be sought in Spain, where it provided the religious foundations for Franco's fascist regime, and it also exported these tendencies to Latin America. Pope Francis, who comes from Latin America and knows the organization so well, has recently tried to face it, aware of their American goals. He changed some church internal affairs, transfer from the dicasteria for the bishops to the powers of the dicastery for clergy, but the organization is too strong and thoughtfully built in the long run to shake it more, and as is usual in the church, it all fits into mysterious words about charisma protection. František's change I think they mean Francis's. Francis's change is thus presented to members of the community as an opportunity for deeper understanding of the spirit that the Lord imposed on the founder of the prelature, under which anything can be imagined. This paragraph did not get translated. I think it's just background info about when he was canonized. Then they say their goal is for the United States to become the hard conservative country where the world of order will be again, and women and others will know their place. Their fingers are so long that they can get their people in the U.S. Supreme Court to influence key decisions in the direction they need. The key person in this is lawyer Leonard Leo, whom Opus Dei thanks their father. They gradually attracted Panula and put him in charge of a very influential Catholic Information Center. Like Panula, Leo became a bridge connecting prelature with important people in Capitol Hill. Arnie Panula was an Opus Dei priest who was also very, very, very close friends with Peter Thiel. The thinking and interests of the sectarian Opus Dei and CIC are behind Project 2025. Project architect Kevin Roberts, director of the Heritage Foundation, is part of this church movement. According to Roberts, the Heritage Foundation is institutionalized Trumpism, including the use of the word Trumpism as a new political direction and state ideology. From the recent history of the Heritage Foundation, we can mention that, among other things, it has fought against the financing and armaments of Ukraine and, which is crucial for the understanding the functioning of the Trump administration, is behind the current cutting of the administration with a chainsaw. The rapid release of tens of thousands of employees comes from their cookbook. It is not an initiative of a genius entrepreneur, Musk and his Doge. Musk only performs what is an openly presented goal of Project 2025. Useful idiots, right? We should also be interested in the views of the director of Roberts in Europe because he is openly opposed to a strongly cooperating European Union. It publicly declares that the United States wants to see a Europe fragmented into individual nation states based on illiberal democracy, a term that Orban has been minting for a long time, Trump's main ally in Europe. It has even existed since at least 2023, contractually declared cooperation between the official state of Orban Danube Institute and the Heritage Foundation. In interviews, Roberts explicitly points to Hungary as a model country where managed a conservative Christian turnaround. The vice president, J.D. Vance himself, is the so-called Catholic integralist. It is probably the harshest direction in the Catholic Church in its radical form, more or less openly far-right misrepresentations of Catholic teaching. They love Pope Pius X. They absolutely do not recognize secularization, but they do not recognize the equality of church and state. They want everything to be subordinated to faith/the church. This American Catholic integration is openly directed against a liberal pluralist democracy. It is, in other words, theology of the ultra-right. What has become extraordinary over the last decade and is decisive for what has happened in the USA is that there has been a wonderful ecumenism. Ecumenism is generally a direction for the rapprochement of individual Christian churches, and here it worked. Just as those radical offshoots, and so now in America, Catholic fundamentalists are pulling together with radical evangelicals. It describes ChristNet, the scale of real or perceived threats to the world of this ecumen, including phenomena such as the civil rights movement for blacks, hippies, of course, feminism, migrants, Muslims, and so on. The article continues. I'm not going to read the whole thing because we're starting to run short on time, but if you want to read it, you can find it down below. And it is really interesting reading about United States politics from a source that is not in the United States. I don't know why, but I find it refreshing. All right, so got some more from Paula here. Before we get into it, we got, after this article, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get through. So we're going to be cooking along. Anthony said, I've been practicing Catholic in 20 years. Can confirm the ideas are still deeply embedded. Yeah. When you're raised Catholic by a family where being Catholic is a huge part of your identity, like it's, you could say, like one of the foundational cornerstones of your identity. Even after you leave that religion, leave the practicing of it, you never really can completely remove all of that stuff. It's always going to be a lens through which you view the world. And I think there's a lot you can do to work through it, be aware of it, address it, but it's always going to be there. And those who know, and I'm sure it's the same for any other religion as well. When you're raised in it your entire life, it becomes such a part of who you are and how you move through and view the world. Yeah. Food Cart said, finished Opus the day before the Pope died. While I was riding the same train, I met the Opus Dei recruiter on years ago. It's great. I experienced the weirdest Catholicism-related 24-hour emotional swing. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad to echo Michael's sentiment, Food Cart. I am glad that you have Opus Dei behind you. All right, so let's get through this article. This is from Clarin, Paula Bistagnino, and her book on Opus Dei, The Religious Obsession to Discipline Bodies. An investigation into the singular order, the most conservative of the Catholic Church, exposes its desire for power and the complaints of trafficking and exploitation that the work faces. Quote, Opus Dei is very comfortable with the speeches and actions of this time by Millier and Trump, says Paula Bistagnino. The book is already in the second edition. It's presented on May 1st at the Buenos Aires Book Fair. It says, the Opus Dei, this was published on the 11th of last month. The Opus Dei, that religious machinery that linked extreme positions, political ties, and economic power, which has always been a discomfort for its own Catholic Church and for several popes, still stands and is eager to reinvent itself and return to positions of power around the world. In our country, it continues to occupy a place within Catholicism as a factor that is not numerous but does influence. In a large investigation, the journalist Paula Bistagnino has entered that dark personal prelature, as technically defined, follows and portrays a family that integrates the work, as it calls itself, in the widely read and already for the second edition, I Will Serve You. The rest of that didn't. La Torre Cruza Los Caminos de la Fe didn't translate the rest of it. The organization declares to have 9,000 members in 68 countries, and of these, some 5,000 are in Argentina. Bistagnino explains that what is never accounted for is the great structure that works on that religious heart that integrates an elite of power in all countries, which is of an enormous number of people. Bankers, lawyers, businessmen, such as the case of the largest donor of the work, Gregorio Perez Companc, who offered more than $100 million for the construction of the Astral University. There are also academics, journalists, judges, among them cases such as the recently resigned court judge Manuel Garcia Mancia, dean of the Astral University and related to Opus Dei, as well as Santiago Castro Videla, who was trained in that university and today is the Treasury attorney, replacement of another announced, Rodolfo Berra, also adherent. I grew up in beautiful View, Greater Buenos Aires, in the 80s, and there was talk of Opus Dei in large families, of a lot of money, being very conservative. At 12, 13 years old, I found out from an aunt about the existence of a maid school to work in the homes of the families of Opus Dei. After several years, I reconnected with the subject as a journalist. Soon after, it became known the judicial complaint of 42 women from these schools and that they had been subjected to servitude and whose denunciation today shakes the walls of the Vatican. The researcher draws an axis to tell the great story of Opus Dei, and that's the one with the Gianoli Ganza family of Uruguayan origin, but with ramifications in our country. In 1954, Maria Elena and her daughter Alina landed in Buenos Aires, who entered the Obra as a numerary, a hierarchical category at the top of the organization's pyramid. The material legacy of this whole family is a subject of legal disputes because there is a tradition of leaving complete inheritances for the benefit of Opus, which has given it economic power throughout the world. In this case, family resistance brought the case to justice. It is around this plot that many others are developed, and that mix with Argentina's own history. So, Paula Bistagnino took the story of a family to tell the intriguing and complex dark background that is Opus Dei. There is a metaphor with which Opus Dei explains the vision, maintains the author of the book, in a bar in Parque Lizama. Quotes, society is like a mountain. To dominate it, you have to reach the top, and from there, melt the snow towards the base. A spillover effect of religious ideology. Almost a century after his birth, in 2028, he turns 100, so Opus Dei is in crisis regarding the most religious and conservative heart of those members who live with rules of self-flagellation, celibacy, confinement, and so on. But the fabric of power, social, and political influence is still as or more alive than ever. It continues to support a power structure that is the most important thing in Opus Dei. Opus Dei has a religious core of members and then a powerful machinery around it involving universities, economic, political, and judicial elites. At present, they are at a particular moment because they have a dispute with the Vatican, with Pope Francis, and are hacked by the complaint, perhaps the most important that they have had in these almost 100 years of history, trafficking in women for domestic services. Bergoglio is a Jesuit, and that order has had a historical rivalry with Opus Dei since its birth in Spain in 1928. With Francoism, they get the approval of the Spanish Church. Then its founder, Jose Maria Escriva de Balaguer, travels to Rome and achieves empowerment. The Jesuits have a contrary view of how the Church should function, how the Christian community is armed. For Opus, it is built from top to bottom with a class gaze of an elite that descends and spills on the bases. And for the Jesuits, the Church rises from the bases. So here's her book, Te servire, I will serve you. I hope that someday it gets translated into English, or what should really happen, I hope that my Spanish language learning becomes advanced enough that I'm able to read this kind of literature in its original Spanish. That would be a dream come true. That's what I'm working towards. But if you're in a country, or if you speak Spanish, you're in a country, you can get this book. Please do support Paula's hard work and her journalism. Anyway, reading on, Opus Dei arrived in Argentina and Chile in the 1950s. They were installed, and one of the first moments in which they gained power is with the Ongaña dictatorship, when it granted them state money to manage the maid schools. La Nuce donates a quarter-block lot to them in Recoleta, where they built their main headquarters with a subsidy that Jorge Rafael Videla then gives them by decree. In that period, there is an important entry of numerary members, while having more access to direct power. And then she's asked, in the 90s, some known names are also evident, right? And she says, yes, there is an important income of law students from the Astor University in the judiciary through Rodolfo Berra, thanks to an internship system. Berra claimed to be a cooperator of the work, and Gustavo Belize, a follower of the teachings of Jose Maria Escriva de Balaguer, as Francisco Truso, ambassador to the Vatican. The former judge of the court, Antonio Boganio, became a supernumerary. Here are some of those lovely ladies that are attempting to get justice for themselves now. I love this picture. How did the scandal that caused the spread of the fact that they were exploited women working in the homes of members of the organization for free and without any rights impact the Opus? Some former Opus members I was able to speak to told me, you have to look at the economic structure of Opus, because what would screw them the most is that those secrets be revealed when they say they are poor. However, I think that nothing was as hard for the organization as the complaint of these women for various reasons. Our upper-class members who spiritually subdue people, demanding obedience and other issues more linked to a religious sect, but what they never believed was that these women, who are the poorest and those who had been subjected to domestic service and who generally lived in semi-closed or confined conditions, were going to bring them more problems in front of the Vatican than those who could have brought them any type of complaint related to the economic side of things. Here is a formal accusation against the main Opus authorities of the last 40 years. They ask, what is the status of the complaint and its cause? The accusation arises from a 2-year secret investigation that made the Office of the Attorney for Trafficking and Exploitation of Persons, to which the federal justice and the prosecutor Eduardo Taino joined. Together, they raised the accusation because they consider it proved that there was indeed a system of recruitment, submission, and exploitation of women in Argentina. The Catholic Church never had such a serious accusation, and now Opus Dei has it, which is an institution of the Church. It's getting windy out there. Let's see. Reading on. One of the most conservative branches of the Church, Opus usually exposes the desire to return to a past, distant, and pure time. They consider that the Church lost a power that it should not have lost, that was at the center of our lives. The Church was in charge of the civil registry. It was part of the state. They want power without being noticed, to be a part of the state. They want to regain that centrality that religion had in our lives. And why do you think that they want that? Is it because they want religion to occupy a more central place because they want more people to get into heaven? Or is it because religions can function awfully well as a system to control and manipulate people? You tell me, I'm just asking the question. Opus Dei is very comfortable with the speeches and actions of this time by Millet and Trump and by the right in general, which come to restore certain ideas, to turn back certain debates, as Millet said in Davos. When the egalitarian marriage and the gender identity law began to be debated here, Opus Dei began to give all its members, family, and collaborators in their spiritual retreats a workshop called Male and Female. Opus Dei has a great machinery for generating ideas, very prominent academics trained in its universities who are very good, who know how to get through information, speeches, and then what they do is they train their members in these ideas. It is a discussion that they have been giving. Opus Dei is also part of many conservative far-right organizations that are also not only concerned with living religiosity in a very pure way. They are not thinking about their individual or shared life with an institution. They want that to reach all of society and for society to live according to their ideas. Boom. And the debates over the decriminalization of abortion, for example, in the hearings that were held in the National Congress, you saw cures protesting against abortion, which were identifiable as such. And then you saw influential people who were doctors or who were lawyers or who were university professors of ethics, bioethics, and you did not know that they were members. It is a machinery that generates knowledge, spreads ideas, accesses the media, the world of scientific research, institutions. They have a vocation for power. So you can go and read the rest of that article down below in its entirety. It's excellent, but again, making some excellent points. I don't see the wrong in any of it. So this is Vatican News. I'm just going to read the headline and a little bit of it because I'm not going to read the whole thing. But it said, Pope encourages Opus Dei students to persevere in hope. And a message to participants in the UNIV 2025 International Congress, Pope Francis urges them to bring the gospel of Jesus into the world as a message of hope that does not disappoint. For those of you who might not know, UNIV, the international congress they do every single year, a bunch of young people from all over go and show up. It has also traditionally been used as the time when young people who are being groomed to whistle for Opus Dei will be encouraged to write their letter whistling while they are there at the event. And that's something that has been talked about pretty consistently on Opus Libris and on Opus Dei Exposed. So I thought that was interesting. I also thought the headline was interesting in light of everything, especially with what Francis was trying to do, allegedly, question mark, with Opus Dei. Now he's dead, of course, so who knows what's going to happen. But all right, this is from The Guardian. This is exciting because this is a Western English-speaking media outlet. The Guardian is pretty widely read and I think still relatively respected, and they are carrying a story about Opus Dei. This was published on the 14th of April. And the headline says, I became like a slave. Why 43 women are suing the secretive Opus Dei Catholic group in Argentina. Lured by promises of an education, but allegedly trapped in servitude and self-mortification, the former members are suing the ultra-conservative organization over their exploitation and abuse. This was written by Harriet Barber in Buenos Aires. Unfortunately, let's see, I'll do it later. Well, okay, good. I've been running into a lot of paywalls here recently with these news articles. Things will get delivered to my inbox with a really interesting headline. I'll go to try to read it. There's a paywall, so I thought I was about to get another one. But this was written by Harriet Barber, like I said, Buenos Aires, 14th of April. It says, the first item Opus Dei gave 12-year-old Andrea Martinez was a pink dress. The second was a schedule that detailed every task for every minute of her day. Then, when she was 16, she was given a silis, a spiked metal chain to wear around her thigh, and a whip. In the late 1980s, Opus Dei, a secretive and ultra-conservative Catholic organization, promised Martinez an escape from a life of poverty in rural Argentina. By attending one of their schools, they said she would receive an education and opportunities. They told me I would study and progress. I thought it was an education that later I'd be able to help my family, says Martinez, now 50. But I became like a slave. They treated me like a slave without any capacity to think or act or do. Martinez, along with dozens of other women in Argentina, has accused Opus Dei, which has a presence in more than 70 countries, but is strongest in Spain, Italy, and Latin America, of coercing them as children and adolescents into a life of domestic servitude. It says after a 2-year investigation, Argentinian federal prosecutors have taken on their case, accusing senior leaders of Opus Dei in South America of overseeing the exploitation and trafficking of girls, adolescents, and women between 1972 and 2015. The prosecutor's report is now before a judge who will decide whether to proceed to trial. Opus Dei has categorically denied the accusations and says that they have been taken completely out of context. It says the school Martina was sent to was several hours from her parents' house. She remembers being put to work the day she arrived, along with dozens of other children. Quote, my mother left and I was given my schedule. We worked 9 hours a day, 7 days a week, washing the clothes and preparing the food of senior male members. We only had 3 hours of school a day. The organization succeeded, the women say, because the girls were kept isolated and docile, allowed only one phone call and letter home a month. And most likely, allegedly, probably, their correspondence was read, their phone calls were listened to. They had no privacy or opportunity to escape. From the very beginning, I was told that I couldn't say anything about Opus Dei or what was happening to my parents. We were told always to be obedient and docile. They would only send my letters if they thought that what I had written was acceptable. I was cut off from the outside world, she adds. Sebastian Sal, the woman's lawyer, alleges that the vocational schools were a seedbed for Opus Dei. They tried to keep them like little children, Sal says. They justify all of this by saying that it is a decision from God. The ultimate scapegoat. Let's see. The women have criticized the Catholic organization's response. They are demanding financial compensation, an acknowledgement of their suffering, and a formal apology. We want Opus Dei to accept what they have done and recognize its impact, says Martinez. Today, Martinez is studying psychology, while Delgado, another former member, has recently completed secondary school, only 40 years late, she says. Carraro has married and has a teenage daughter. She says meeting the other 42 women has brought her peace. At last, she says, I'm free. All right, this is one of those articles I won't be able to read because there is a paywall that it disappears behind to. This is Diario de Navarra, though, and the headline, this is one of those fluff pieces that I mentioned earlier in the stream about that new, this is the new priest of Opus Dei, let's see, lived in Finland. Yeah, he's in Finland, not Iceland. Did I say Iceland? Crap, I think I was saying Iceland all over the place. I think it's Finland, but at any rate, in Scandinavia, he's been up there. He's written a book. He's done a bunch of interviews talking about what he's doing up there. Now he's in this little article saying, I've bathed in the Arctic and celebrated Mass in the North Cape. And it's just like, okay. I just thought it was a weird headline. I've bathed in the Arctic and celebrated Mass in the North Cape. 2025 is the year the Catholic Church starts advocating cold plunges. All right, second to last article here. It has once again been proven that some do harm to others in the name of God. I think this is also from a Czech site. It says it's very hard to see that, but that again, just that light came, that former members of a religious sect, this time the Spanish Opus Dei, faced not only being deceived in the name of God, but being exploited and essentially enslaved. The much sponsored Opus Dei was founded in Spain, and its founder has since been consecrated a saint. Perhaps it is known that this organization has countless, very influential members worldwide, which is explained by the fact that it is very rare for someone to be a member of this organization as a poor, unknown person. It is very rare. Opus Dei typically likes to know rich, influential people among its members, as these people can have a much more serious influence not only on political affairs, but also. I lost my place. But also essentially on the processes that prevail in the world. But obviously, they're not just looking for richer, influential people, for there's also a need for servants who are vulnerable and poor enough to be able to take on almost anything in exchange for all kinds of promises. So, in the Guardian article and in this article, which is from a Czech site, you see discussion about what is happening, this case in Latin America with these 43 former members and the Argentine federal authorities. It's starting to gain more attention. It's starting to get more press, and I wanted to highlight that because I think that's a good thing. I think that's important, especially for the Guardian. To have finally picked it up, I mean, I feel like the Guardian's kind of dragging its feet, honestly, considering the fact that there has been pretty substantial media coming out from like the AP and the Financial Times and a host of well-respected Latin news sites about this situation. I feel like the Guardian in the U.S. has been really quiet on it, which is weird. We won't get into speculations as to why that might be, but since it is finally starting to enter more of the mainstream conversation, I wanted to highlight that. And also, I mean, I haven't done a comprehensive search. I need to like sit down and actually look back and see how many times North American publications have talked about this issue since it hit like the headlines back in 2022. But I feel like, this is just my feeling, my perspective, I feel like there really hasn't been a lot from North American publications. All right, last but not least, this was actually sent to me by a subscriber, which I really, really appreciate. It slipped by me in my news alerts or didn't pop up for whatever reason. So thank you for sending this my way, and feel free to always send me articles. You can send them to me in my DMs on Instagram if you follow me there, on X, or really wherever. In the comments of a video will work just fine too, but I appreciate it. In the headline, this is from Crux Now. Cardinals discuss abuse while prelate sanctioned for it joins meetings. So this is about the sanctioned Cardinal Cipriani, Juan Luis Cipriani. We've been talking about him since the new year, about the fact that he was told to leave Lima, Peru, and never return. It's been a whole ongoing thing because of impropriety, allegations of abuse, the whole 9 yards. And so now that Pope Francis is dead and they are trying to figure out what they're going to do next, some things have been kind of left up in the air, I think, a little bit. I mean, this Cipriani situation was kind of one of the last large profile situations that Pope Francis was kind of involved in before his death. And it's all very, very fresh too. Like this all happened, within the last few months. This has all been unfolding. So there's that example, and then obviously with Opus Dei, that kind of has been left up in the air, and who knows what's going to happen. They were supposed to be releasing new statutes. Who knows if that's going to happen now? Yeah, who knows? But this article here, coming from Rome, written by Elise Ann Allen, says as cardinals meet in Rome ahead of a conclave to elect the next pope, a Peruvian cardinal accused of sexual abuse and whose ministry was restricted by Pope Francis has joined private meetings with his fellow Red Hatters. Vatican spokesman Matteo Bruni said April 28th that during a morning session of pre-conclave general congregations that day, cardinals discussed issues of relevance for the future of the church. These topics, he said, included the relationship with the modern world and some challenges that are highlighted, such as evangelization, relations with other faiths, and the issue of abuse. They spoke about the qualities the new pontiff will have to possess in order to respond to these challenges. The discussion on abuse and who will be up to the task of credibly tackling it by the roughly 180 cardinals present, over 100 of whom are eligible to vote in the conclave, came the day after a cardinal who had been sanctioned by Pope Francis for sexual abuse had been seen at a public event with his fellow prelates paying homage to the late pontiff, and after he was seen leaving the hall where the meetings are taking place. So it says Peruvian Cardinal Juan Luis Cipriani, 81, is the former Archbishop of Lima, and for decades was a towering right-wing personality in the church in Latin America. So he'd been accused of sexually abusing an adolescent boy, sanctioned by Pope Francis in 2018, with restrictions on participation in a conclave and on donning cardinal attire. So an individual who chose to remain anonymous was the one who initially reported the abuse, which he said happened in 1983 when he was between 16 to 17 years of age. A previous complaint had come against Cipriani in 2002. So there is a history there, and regardless of all of this, though, he's currently in Rome and was seen visiting Pope Francis while laying in state, and at an April 27th Vespers service in the Basilica of St. Mary Major, where Francis is buried after visiting his tomb. He was also seen leaving the hall, so, like, the guy is running around all over the place. Here's a picture of him, wearing his, like, cardinal attire and everything. After news of the allegations against Cipriani went public in January, they confirmed the restrictions on Cipriani's ministry to media. The cardinals imposed a penal precept with some disciplinary measures in 2019, and these were related to his public activity, place of residence, and use of insignia. And Bruni at the time clarified that the restrictions appear to still be in force, even though Cipriani has repeatedly denied these allegations, calling them completely false, saying that he's innocent, blah, blah, blah. Pope Francis apparently wasn't convinced. While acknowledging the restrictions on his ministry imposed directly by Pope Francis, he also argued that the Pope had not followed due process and compared himself to Australian Cardinal George Pell. Yikes. I don't know I'd be hurrying to compare myself to that guy, but what did I say earlier about birds of a feather? In the wake of Cipriani's denials and backlash that the allegations against him created, Cardinal Carlos Castillo of Lima, Cipriani's successor as Archbishop of Lima, issued a statement supporting the alleged victim and the Pope. Let's see. He's insisting his innocence. Bruni, during Monday's press conference, did not confirm whether Cipriani was participating in the general congregation meetings, even though everybody's seeing him running around and leaving the room and everything. So they questioned why Cipriani would be allowed to participate. I'm questioning that too, after having been sanctioned by Pope Francis. According to the paragraph 7 in chapter 2 of the document, all cardinals are summoned who are not legitimately impeded. Quote, if punishment imposed by the Pope himself for a cardinal's sexual assault of a child doesn't constitute a legitimate impediment, what on earth does? The organization asked. While they applauded the cardinal's commitment to tackling abuse as a priority and electing the next pope, Bishop Accountability said, including an alleged abuser in their meetings discredits their work. The cardinals must show that they mean what they say, and that means immediately banning Cipriani and any other culpable church leader from the rest of their meetings. What do you think? You think that'll happen, though? I feel like every single one of them is dirtier than the last. But yeah, that is the entirety of the April news analysis. We got through it. Quite a number of interesting articles, a number of interesting developments that I am going to be looking forward to seeing, keeping an eye on in the future, seeing what following media comes out about them. Some interesting little tidbits about the Sodalizio Christianae Vitae that I did not know, which I'm definitely going to be keeping in mind as I work through that deep dive. Let me take a look at the chat. Okay, Anthony said, gotta run. Hope to catch the next stream. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I genuinely, truly appreciate it so much. I appreciate the fact that there has been real sustained interest in this newsroom analysis thing that I've been doing. I think that's really, really cool. I appreciate the time and the attention that people give it, and sharing your thoughts and your feedback and everything else has been awesome. If you have any other suggestions for content that you would like to see or anything like that, definitely let me know. I'm open to taking suggestions. But that is, oh yes, commenter just said check out the Flying Kitchen. I am familiar with the Flying Kitchen. Yeah, YouTube channel here in the United States from a woman who was she was associated with Opus Dei for a short time. Had the unfortunate interaction of befriending, she thought, a couple of women who were in Opus Dei, and then the whole thing kind of evolved from there. It's all on her YouTube channel, The Flying Kitchen. She also does like weekly streams talking about the sort of theocratic movement that's happening within U.S. politics right now as well, which if you're interested in the more political side of things, I'd highly recommend it, because you're probably not going to get a lot of that here from me. Yeah, very good channel to check out. She's in North America. She's an English-speaking person talking about Opus Dei, so not a lot of us out there. So I want to promote her, especially because she had firsthand experience with this organization too. So, but yeah, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ohms. Thank you, Prince of Peanuts, Anthony, everybody. I really, really appreciate it. Reminders that everything we talked about today is linked down the source document below, along with details to connect with me on social media if you would like to. And you can support my work virtually if you so desire by buying me a coffee for $5. And thank you to everybody who has, because this is a completely independent venture. So if it weren't for your guys' support, it would not be nearly as possible. So thank you very, very much. What else do I need to say before I get out of here? Oh, if you are looking for more content and don't want to leave my channel yet, head over to the channel page, and I have some playlists set up about various topics that might interest you, including some that are just documentaries, interesting documentaries that I found over the years about human rights, the environment, other things tangentially connected to what I talk about here, so you can go and check that out there. Yeah, and that I think pretty much concludes things for today. We are a little bit over time, but it's okay. Thank you all for being here. Let's see. I think I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. So yeah, thank you, and nolite te bastardes carborandorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down, guys. I'll see you soon. Bye.